Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats, we are about to get started. If you haven't heard me, please take your seats. We're going to get started. And I think our IT colleagues will now show us a welcoming video. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome you to the 26th Alliance Against Trafficking Conference. I warmly welcome all of you who are joining us here in Vienna, as well as our colleagues who are joining us online from across the OSCE region and beyond. Your presence, both in this room and virtually, reflects the continued commitment to addressing one of the most complex and rapidly evolving forms of human trafficking we face today. Thank you for joining us. The Alliance Conference remains a unique and essential platform. For over 2 decades, it has brought together governments, international organizations, civil society, survivor leaders, lived experience experts, academia, and the private sector to align efforts, exchange expertise, and strengthen coordinated responses to trafficking in human beings. Please allow me to start with a few technical points. Our conference will be primarily conducted in English, but please note that interpretation in all the official OSCE languages is available, and I'll thank now our interpreters for making that possible. Please also note that the conference is being recorded and broadcast on our events page and the OSCE's YouTube channel. Additionally, you may have noted that there is media present in the room. Should you not wish to be included in any footage, please notify my colleagues behind me here at the Secretariat desk, where you can also sign up to take the floor during each panel discussion if you have not done so already. Please note that the interventions are available only in person. We will try our best to accommodate as many requests as possible, and to make that possible, I ask for all of you to please stick to the 2-minute time limit. We're happy to circulate longer interventions in writing afterward. For civil society representatives and media that are with us here in the room, the microphone for floor interventions is at the back of the room where you came in. This year, due to significant budget-related venue constraints, unfortunately, in-person participation is limited and has affected both state and non-governmental participants equally. We remain committed to inclusive participation and are ensuring full access online to all sessions with opportunities for active contributions through the chat function. We are grateful to all of you for your understanding and support in adapting to these constraints. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Alliance Conference focuses on a form of trafficking that has grown rapidly in scale, sophistication, and impact, yet it remains insufficiently understood and addressed. Trafficking for the purpose of criminal exploitation, often known as forced criminality. Across the OSCE region, we are seeing a sharp increase in cases. What was once considered a marginal phenomenon has become one of the fastest growing trafficking trends. From just 2018 to 2024, we saw a 17-fold increase in identified victims of this form of trafficking in participating states that reported data to us. While these increasing numbers are not reported in all states, they are consistent with global patterns and they affect us all. Behind cyber scams, drug trafficking, theft, and other criminal activities, there might also be victims, not only offenders. Individuals who have been deceived, coerced, and controlled. Individuals who are compelled to commit crimes for the profit of others. And yet, too often, victims are arrested, prosecuted, and detained. while those who exploit them remain untouched, continuing to operate, expand, and profit with impunity. This is not only a protection failure, it is a security blind spot. As human trafficking is increasingly linked to other crimes committed by transnational organized criminal groups, it is a growing security threat across the OSCE. So what does this mean for us? It means that our current responses are not keeping pace with the evolving nature of the crime. It means that we must dig deeper through all the layers, moving beyond traditional distinctions between victim and offender, and recognize how coercion operates in practice. And it means that we must shift our approach from traditional practices of identification and prosecution to understand the nuanced elements of the crime and the exploitation beneath. We must do so by using and adapting all the tools at our disposal. The scale of this crime is growing, but so is the cost of inaction. This must change, and it can. This conference is our opportunity to commit to strengthen our systems and ensure that our responses are both victim-centered and security-informed. Over the next 2 days, this conference will focus on exactly these elements, not only understanding the problem, but delivering practical tools to combat it so that we can achieve results. In short, we will commit to work together to strengthen early and accurate victim identification, particularly in complex cases of forced criminality. Close critical protection gaps, including through the consistent application of the non-punishment principle. Improve referral mechanisms between law enforcement, prosecutors, and support services, and enhance detection and prosecution of forced criminality, as well as cross-agency collaboration, recognizing that trafficking today intersects with cybercrime, financial crime, drug trafficking, and other forms of organized crime. Because this crime does not operate in silos, neither can we. Ladies and gentlemen, to support participating states in this effort, my office has developed a series of data-informed tools and publications, some of which will be launched and presented throughout the conference. These include, but are not limited to, a comprehensive analysis of the harrowing link between human trafficking and drug trafficking. New research on trafficking for forced criminality in cyber scam operations in the OSCE region. And survivor and trauma-informed model standard operating procedures to support identification of forced criminality, developed together with our keynote speaker, Sosa Henkoma. Lastly, the OSCE 2026 Survivor Report on efforts to combat trafficking in human beings, where 55 out of 57 OSCE participating states, a record number, provided data, and thank you to those who contributed. All of these tools are designed to provide a strong empirical foundation and translate evidence into practical guidance. And I encourage all of you to take advantage of them in the coming months and years ahead. So now allow me briefly to guide you through the program of this year's conference. Over the next 2 days, our discussions are structured to move from understanding the scope and nature of the problem to identifying practical, victim-centered responses, and finally, to defining concrete actions going forward. This afternoon, panel 1 will set the scene by examining trafficking for the purpose of forced criminality as a rapidly expanding and often hidden threat across the OSCE region. This panel will challenge how we traditionally distinguish between trafficking, exploitation, and criminality. It will explore how individuals, often children, migrants, and those in vulnerable situations, are coerced into criminal activities and subsequently treated as offenders rather than as victims. By unpacking the patterns, drivers, and security implications of this phenomenon, the discussion will highlight the urgent need for a paradigm shift toward responses that are both victim-centered and security-informed. Following panel 1, we will have the first round of this conference's side events. We will have a rich program of side events organized both by my office and by our partners, especially within the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons Expert Coordination Team. And I'd like to thank all those who are organizing side events to further enrich the discussions. Today's side events will provide an opportunity to engage more deeply with key aspects of the issue, including the launch of our assessment of cyber scam operations in the OSCE region. You will also have the opportunity to attend a side event on the identification and non-punishment of victims in complex cases. Tomorrow morning, we will begin with additional side events, including the presentation of the OSCE research on the link between human and drug trafficking, and a side event on cross-regional perspectives to strengthen survivor-centered responses before moving into panel 2. The second panel will highlight concrete practices that support early identification, effective referral, and protection of victims, while preventing their punishment and prosecution. It will showcase how coordinated approaches, bringing together law enforcement, prosecutors, social services, and civil society, can strengthen both victim protection and public safety. In the afternoon, following further side events addressing the non-punishment principle, children trafficked for criminal activities, and the psychosocial impacts of trafficking for forced criminality, Panel 3 will bring our collective action together by focusing on turning insight into impact. This final panel will propose priority actions at policy, legislative, and operational levels. It will explore how to strengthen prevention, improve consistent application of the non-punishment principle, enhance cross-sector and cross-border cooperation, and advance accountability for perpetrators. As in previous years, this conference will also benefit from the invaluable contributions of lived experience experts and survivor leaders, whose insights are essential in grounding our discussions in reality and ensuring that our responses are effective. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, forced criminality challenges how we understand trafficking. It challenges how we identify victims and perpetrators, and it challenges how we deliver justice. But it also offers us an opportunity to strengthen our protection systems and rule of law, to close longstanding gaps, and to ensure that our responses are both victim-centered and security-informed. Because protecting victims and strengthening security are not competing objectives. They are mutually reinforcing. Let me again thank all of you for being here, for your continued engagement, and for your commitment to this shared effort. I now have the honor to give the screen to the OSCE Secretary General, who has kindly offered us a few recorded words to open the 26th Alliance Against Trafficking Conference.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to address you for the opening of the 26th OSCE Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons Conference. This year's focus, Trafficking for the Purpose of Forced Criminality, reflects one of the most complex and rapidly evolving security challenges across the OSCE region. We are witnessing a convergence of crimes. Victims are being coerced into drug trafficking, theft, fraud, and even violent offenses. None of these offenses are new, but the speed, scale, and scope are unprecedented. Digital technologies are scaling and transforming how this exploitation is organized, from online recruitment to encrypted communication and use of virtual assets to conceal and launder the illicit proceeds. Minors and youth across the OSCE are in peril as these targets of criminal networks. At the core of this phenomenon is one constant: profit. In cyber scams, financial fraud, drug-related crime, trafficking is driven by financial gain. Recent estimates suggest that global scam losses alone surpassed $1 trillion in 2024. Behind these staggering figures are not only financial victims, but also trafficking victims forced to carry out these crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, forced criminality is not only a human rights issue, it is a multidimensional security threat. It affects all dimensions of the OSCE. This scourge undermines stability and security by strengthening organized crime, imposes a growing cost, defrauding individuals, and strengthening public resources, and it weakens the rule of law and fundamental human rights, particularly when victims are punished and perpetrators evade accountability. We must recognize that conflicts and crises create fertile ground for this form of exploitation. Displacement, economic hardship, and weakened protection systems increase vulnerability. And these despicable traffickers are quick to exploit these conditions.
Given these
Context,
technical challenges,
inclusive dialogue.
I think we will go ahead and post the video online and share it with all participants so that because I think we're missing a lot of it, unfortunately, with the technical challenges there. And continuing online, I have the honor to pass the screen to our next speaker, who is representing the OSCE chairpersonship in office. I welcome the Minister of Justice, of Switzerland, Federal Councillor Beat Jans. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us virtually. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sehr geehrte Frau Sonderbeauftragte, sehr geehrter Herr Generalsekretär, sehr geehrte Direktorin des OSZE-Büros für demokratische Institutionen und Menschenrechte, geschätzte Damen und Herren, es freut mich sehr, Sie im Namen des Schweizer OSZE-Vorsitzes hier begrüßen zu dürfen und es ehrt mich, dass ich diese Konferenz mit eröffnen darf. Die Konferenz bringt Menschen zusammen, die sich täglich für den Schutz von Opfern von Menschenhandel einsetzen. Sie verbindet Fachwissen, Erfahrung und Engagement und sie sendet ein klares Signal: Menschenhandel hat in unserer Gesellschaft keinen Platz. Die Schweiz hat sich für ihren OSZE-Vorsitz in diesem Jahr 5 Prioritäten gesetzt. Und eine davon möchte ich heute besonders hervorheben: die Antizipation von Technologien für eine sichere und humane Zukunft. Warum genau diese? Weil sich der Menschenhandel verändert, genau wie die Technologien auch. Kriminelle Netzwerke nutzen digitale Technologien gezielt in allen Phasen der Ausbeutung. Sie werben mit Hilfe von neuen Technologien potenzielle Opfer an, sie kontrollieren sie mittels sozialer Medien und bieten dann ihre erzwungenen Dienstleistungen der Kundschaft an. Gleichzeitig eröffnen genau diese Technologien aber auch Chancen. Wir können mit deren Unterstützung Opfer besser identifizieren und auch die Strafverfolgung kann neue Technologien einsetzen. Und sie ermöglichen eine engere internationale Zusammenarbeit. Wir müssen beides im Blick behalten, die Risiken und die Chancen. Die Risiken zeigen sich deutlich im Thema dieser Konferenz. Menschenhandel zum Zweck der Ausbeutung in gesetzeswidrigen Aktivitäten ist eine der am schnellsten wachsenden Formen der organisierten Kriminalität. Die Kriminellen zwingen die Opfer zu stehlen, Drogen zu handeln oder auch Gewaltdelikte zu begehen. Und wenn die Opfer über spezifisches technisches Fachwissen verfügen, werden sie gezielt angegangen, um etwa für Online-Betrugssysteme ausgebeutet zu werden. Das passiert zum Beispiel in sogenannten Scam-Centern. Häufig wird der Spieß dann umgedreht, die Opfer werden zu Täterinnen und Tätern und von den Behörden und der Gesellschaft auch als solche behandelt. Das dürfen wir nicht zulassen. Frau Johnstone hat es bereits betont, Menschen, die unter Zwang handeln, sind Opfer. Sie brauchen Schutz, nicht Strafe. Gerade bei Minderjährigen ist das besonders dramatisch. Kriminelle werben Kinder und Jugendliche gezielt über soziale Medien an. Die Menschenhändler locken sie mit Versprechen von schnellem Geld, Status und Zugehörigkeit. Und am Ende sind die Opfer exponiert und tragen das Risiko, während die wahren Schuldigen verdeckt im Hintergrund bleiben. Auch in der Schweiz beobachten wir diese Entwicklungen. Minderjährige werden etwa dazu gezwungen, Ladendiebstähle zu begehen, zu betteln oder als Drogenkuriere zu arbeiten. Die so erbeutete Ware und das Geld müssen sie ihren Peinigern abgeben. Und es ist sehr schwierig, diese Zwangssituation und die Minderjährigen als Opfer zu erkennen. Unter anderem, weil strafrechtliche Verfahren bei Jugendlichen in der Schweiz grundsätzlich nicht öffentlich sind. Aber es gibt Hoffnung. Die aktuelle Umfrage über die Umsetzung der OSZE-Verpflichtungen zur Bekämpfung von Menschenhandel zeigt, immer mehr Opfer können identifiziert werden. Immer mehr unterschiedliche Akteure sind an der Identifizierung beteiligt. Nicht nur die Polizei, sondern auch NGOs, Arbeitskontrollen und Sozialdienste. Das ist ein Fortschritt. Der Menschenhandel ist ein komplexes Phänomen und verlangt nach gemeinsamen Antworten. Kommen wir damit zu den Chancen der neuen Technologien. Genau hier liegt die Stärke der OSZE. Sie bringt Sicherheitsfragen, wirtschaftliche Aspekte und Menschenrechte zusammen. Sie schafft Raum für Dialog und Zusammenarbeit über Grenzen und Fachgebiete hinweg. Und sie verbindet Staaten, Organisationen und die Zivilgesellschaft. Denn nur so können adäquate Lösungen erarbeitet werden. Ich möchte an dieser Stelle der Sonderbeauftragten Kari Johnstone und ihrem Team sehr herzlich danken. Ihre Arbeit ist zentral und setzt wichtige Impulse. Die Schweiz arbeitet eng mit ihrem Büro zusammen. Ein Beispiel ist der 2024 veröffentlichte Leitfaden Financial Intelligence Against Human Trafficking. Er hilft Finanzintermediären, verdächtige Transaktionen mit Bezug zu Menschenhandel zu erkennen und er zeigt, wie wichtig die Verbindung von Finanzermittlungen und Opferschutz ist. Wir haben mit Freude zur Kenntnis genommen, dass Sie den Leitfaden in Ihrer kürzlich veröffentlichten Umfrage zur Umsetzung der OSZE-Verpflichtungen im Bereich Menschenhandel als vielversprechende Praxis aufgeführt haben. Meine Damen und Herren, diese Konferenz ist mehr als ein Austausch von Wissen. Sie ist eine Gelegenheit, konkrete Lösungen zu entwickeln. Denn wir brauchen bessere Prävention, wir müssen Opfer frühzeitig erkennen können und wir müssen die konsequente Strafverfolgung von Tätern sicherstellen. Ich schließe mich hier meinem Vorredner und meiner Vorrednerin an. Das schaffen wir nur gemeinsam. Und deshalb möchte ich Sie alle heute bestärken, nutzen Sie diese 2 Tage, tauschen Sie Erfahrungen aus, stellen Sie Fragen und entwickeln Sie gemeinsam neue Ansätze. Ich danke Ihnen sehr herzlich für Ihr Engagement und ich wünsche uns allen eine erfolgreiche und inspirierende Konferenz. Danke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for joining us, and thank you for the ongoing, long-standing support of the Swiss chairpersonship of the OSCE. for the anti-trafficking work of the OSCE, as well as the partnership with Switzerland that we have. And finally, among our opening speakers, let me hand the floor over to Director Maria Talalian of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR. As part of the OSCE-wide effort against human trafficking, ODIHR plays an important role. Ms. Talalian, this is your second Alliance conference in this capacity. A very warm welcome to you as well, and the floor is yours.
Yes, now it's good.
Okay. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and partners, it is my true pleasure to welcome you to this 26th edition of the Alliance Conference. And as Dr. Carrie Johnston mentioned earlier, this Alliance Conference is a unique platform for collective reflection and renewed commitment and action on combating trafficking in human beings in the OSCE region. And let me thank and commend Dr. Johnston, Special Representative and Coordinator for combating trafficking in human beings, and her office for organizing this conference, and for placing the spotlight this year on trafficking for the purpose of forced criminality, a form of exploitation that is growing rapidly and yet still insufficiently understood. This discussion is both urgent and necessary. As already underlined, across the OSCE region, trafficking for forced criminality is rapidly expanding in scope and complexity, affecting adults and children who are coerced into activities ranging from theft and drug cultivation to online scams and other forms of organized crime. Yet, too often, this phenomenon is not understood and recognized as trafficking, leading to too many people trapped in this situation to be treated as offenders rather than victims. These schemes are designed precisely to conceal perpetrators and shift criminal liability onto those exploited, posing both a security and a fundamental human rights concern. When identified as offenders, victims are frequently excluded from national referral mechanisms and related protection and assistance, and instead enter criminal justice pathways leading to detention, deportation, or conviction. As a result, traffickers remain invisible while victims bear the consequences. This is why incorporating what we call the punishment principle into national legislation is not only a legal safeguard, but also an essential human rights protection. Its proper application in these cases ensures that victims of trafficking are not penalized for unlawful acts they were compelled to commit by their traffickers, and that they can smoothly enter protection and assistance programs. At ODIHR, we have a long support to participating states in establishing strong victim-centered and trauma-informed national referral mechanisms. NRM are critical gateways for victims to access the necessary support. Let me explain why in 3 points. First, NRMs ensure that frontline professionals are better equipped to recognize indicators of this form of trafficking. Effective NRMs enable early identification and referral, even when individuals are suspected of criminal conduct. When properly implemented, they ensure systematic, victim-centered, and trauma-informed screening, reducing harm, and supporting cooperation in proceedings where appropriate. Second, NRMs allow victims to have access to protection and individualized and needs-based services and assistance. Victims of trafficking for forced criminality have specific needs, including early legal assistance to challenge charges or clear criminal records, safe accommodation, and trauma-informed psychological, social, and healthcare support. Children may also require guardianship and diversion from juvenile justice systems. Effective NRMs are essential to ensure timely, coordinated access to this tailored support. Third, if appropriately designed, NRMs embed long-term social inclusion and reintegration measures. These are essential for victims of trafficking for forced criminality, who are often left with criminal records, disrupted education or work histories, insecure status, and ongoing safety risks. They may also face stigma and barriers to housing and employment, increasing vulnerability to re-trafficking. Long-term reintegration and social inclusion help restore stability, autonomy, and reduce the risk of re-exploitation. Let me now highlight a core aspect of ODIHR's work to combat human trafficking and our call to states. We must listen to those who have lived through trafficking. Bringing survivors and trafficking for forced criminality into the conversation is essential to shed light on recruitment methods, coercion tactics, and barriers faced when seeking help. Ethical and meaningful survivor inclusion should not just be seen as good practice, but as an essential component of any strategy to combat trafficking in human beings. I would like to commend Dr. Johnston for ensuring survival leaders are once again very well represented in this conference. In this regard, I would like to acknowledge the ODIHR International Survivors for Trafficking Advisory Council, ISTAC, established in 2021 as the first trafficking advisory council to an international organization. ISTAC informs our anti-trafficking work to ensure it is grounded in lived experience. Earlier this year, its third term began with 10 survivor leaders, each an expert in their field. While mentioning ISTAC, allow me to thank Jane Lazander, ISTAC chair, and Gabriela Kerneku-Wolf, ISTAC vice chair. You will hear from them during this course, the course of tomorrow, as well as Sosa Henkoma, ISTAC member who will deliver a keynote in just a few moments. Your presence and contribution to this conference, alongside that of many survivors, many other survivors, is absolutely critical, and we thank for your presence. Excellencies, combating trafficking for forced criminality requires stronger identification, consistent application of the non-punishment principle, and real access to protection and reintegration. It also requires listening to survivors and ensuring their experiences shape our responses. Only then can we see the victims behind criminal acts, uphold their rights, and break the cycle of exploitation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Maria. Thank you for your leadership, also the great partnership with ODIHR. And I appreciate also your focus on the non-punishment principle of victim protection, and especially for making it possible for all of us to benefit from the expertise of ISTOC members' leadership and others that are here. So thank you very much. And now we will turn our attention to our keynote speakers. First, I am pleased to give the floor to Assistant Director for Vulnerable Communities, Organized and Emerging Crime at Interpol, Ms. Rosemary Nalubega. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kari, our audience, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you. One, forced criminality is no longer a marginal phenomenon. It's a growing trafficking modality and security challenge that sits at the intersection of organized crime, cyber-enabled fraud, and human exploitation. The blind gap is not only a crime itself, it is how often we treat these crimes in separate silos. Cyber fraud on one side and trafficking on the other side. When exploitation is hidden behind screens, the trafficking crime scenes can be messed up and victims can be misclassified as offenders. Two, victim reality, trafficked and scammed. We are now confronting dual victimization. People worldwide who lose their savings to fraud and people who are trafficked and coerced into committing these frauds. This is why a victim-centered identification and non-punishment principle is not only optional, but an operational necessity to stop re-victimization and reach the organizers of these crimes. Number three, what we are seeing in current landscape, operational snapshots. They are realities that are coming up. Targets are widening, including minors, and the harm is financial, psychological, and social. Platforms shift quickly. Telegrams, use of Facebook, TikTok, and scams often migrate from one channel to another. The cycle of crime. Raids dismantle centers, but new ones rapidly emerge unless the business model is disrupted. Victim misclassification remains a major challenge. Survivors treated as criminals, which delays justice and protection of these victims. Transnational links are deepening. Organized crime networks combine in recruitment, coercion, fraud, infrastructure, and laundering. AI is double-edged sword. It enables more sophisticated luring and impersonation while offering opportunities for detection and triage. Number four, fraud typologies that interest and intersect with trafficking. The scam ecosystem is broad. Trafficking is interlinked. Schemes are often connected to identity and authority of impersonation, job, visa, immigration fraud, investment and finance fraud, cyber and digital abuse, extortion, and other deception methods. The typologies matter because they shape recruitment narratives, coercion methods, and the evidence trail in terms of accounts, ads, devices, and payment rails, geographical expansion, and a globalization point. What began as a highly visible regional, in brackets, Asian partner has become a global phenomenon. The trend has now shown a clear geographic expansion of modus operandi and emerging hubs beyond the regional epicenters. The operational implication in countries are now appearing across multiple regions, including Africa, Americas, requiring a broader cross-border coordination and shared screening standards. Looking at the facilitators and the organized crime structure, the facilitating ecosystem frequently involves and includes young adults between ages of 20 to 39, and they are predominantly male in many datasets, but the critical message is very structural. These networks rely on recruiters, transporters, document identity, facilitators, money coordinators, and other specialists. Many visible recruiters may themselves be groomed, coerced, which reinforces the need for coercion screening and targeted accountability for organizers and profiteers. Looking at the contribution of Interpol, what Interpol is doing just as a narrative. In March 2022, we conducted an operation called Stormmakers, and this operation uncovered victims to scam centers in Cambodia, and it was an early signal of this trend. In June 2022, a publication of a purple notice on social media recruitment for forced labor in Southeast Asia alerted a global membership to the emerging modus operandi. October 2022 onwards, the human trafficking and smuggling of migrants analytical reports that were launched included confidential and public products on scams and trafficking, followed by successive updates shared widely with the member countries and our key partners. In May 2023, we published an orange notice on human trafficking for the purposes of fraud, reflecting the escalation from regional trend to urgent public safety risk. In May 2024, we also published another analytical update, which highlighted the global expansion and crime convergence, which links other crimes in the hub and other regions. In 2025 June, we published a crime trend update on the Interpol website to strengthen awareness and prevention. November 2025, the threat had been recognized at the Interpol General Assembly, showing the evolution from early warning to global institutional response, and the General Assembly adopted a resolution of the global threat posed by transnational scam centers, recognized as criminal hubs linked to large-scale fraud, human trafficking, abuse, and increasingly advanced technologies. Turning in analysis to operational support, we are providing investigative and coordination support on targeted online support meetings and ongoing facilitation and urgent requests that have been made through our online I-24/7 channel. Operational actions, the Stormmakers 2 explicitly focused on human trafficking for online fraud. Libatella 2, which was conducted in 2024, uncovered dozens of cases globally, included actions against industrial scale scam activities. On-site support deployment. Since August 2024, we have provided assistance in following raids in Philippines with hundreds of potential victims that have been identified. The recently concluded Operation Libatella 3 in 2025 November focused partly on trafficking for forced criminality in scam centers, detection, rescue, repatriation, and hundreds of victims and potential victims were identified and repatriated. Since then, we have conducted debriefing meetings, and through the lessons, we have been able to translate operational analysis, findings, and improve them into practice. These activities have positioned Interpol at the center of shaping the international conversation about human trafficking for purposes of host criminality, including forced fraud, cyber scam centers, and we have treated this as a developing global threat picture, not as one, but both regional and international. In so doing, we are having partnership and coordinated efforts. We engage in many partnership frameworks, including supportive engagements as observers, working with the ODIHR, Emergency Response Network, encouraging different national bureau point of contacts, the I-24/7 for case exchange and investigative support. In summary, Interpol continues to strengthen public-private alliance to explore future project collaboration with OSCE and the Bali process in the region to make sure that we deal with the cyber-enabled human trafficking, including AI-related dimensions. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was quite long. I am now summarizing what we are asking OSCE to do. There are 5 practical commitments for impact. 1, recognize forced criminality as human trafficking where legal elements are met, not only as fraud, but cyber. 2, standardize screening and indicators in offenders' context, raids, arrests, border checks, scam investigations, to mention but a few. Operationalize non-punishment through clear referral pathways and prosecutor-ready coercion indicators. 4, strengthen cross-border cooperation and deconfliction, including timely exchange via police channel, rapid preservation of digital evidence, and follow the money from day-to-day financial intelligence unit integration, asset restraint, networks, virtual assets, and beneficial owners. Rescue is very essential, but without coordinated disruption of organizers and the financial architectures involved, the model simply regenerates elsewhere. Lastly, since early 2022, Interpol, the specialized unit of human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, has worked seriously to track the threat from early operational indicators to a global phenomenon through targeted operations. I've already talked about stormmakers, Libatella, early warning notices, sustained analytical reports, documenting evolving modus operandi, geographic expansion, and links to wider organized crime. We continue to support member countries through the I-24/7 facilitated cooperation, investigative cooperation, and partnership that translate intelligence into action, with a clear focus on identifying trafficked victims with mixed status populations and disrupting the profit model that drives into exploitation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, and thank you for Interpol's leadership as really one of the first international actors recognizing forced criminality and its growth, including in fraud and scam operations. And you also previewed for us a call to action that we are building toward at the end of the conference with some recommendations for both the OSCE and our participating states. So thank you for that. And now it is my pleasure to turn to Ambassador at Large Stanislav Vasilenko from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your words. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, For me personally, it's a very great honor to have a chance to address to this honorable organization in a historical palace. Last time I have used this opportunity in 2019 during Slovakian presidential. So one more time, how long has been passed already? Nobody cares, yes. But on behalf of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kazakhstan, I would like to express our sincere appreciations to OSCE for convening these timely and important discussions. We consider that this alliance to be a vital contribution to strengthening national and international efforts to combat trafficking in person and to protect human rights. Dear colleagues, trafficking in persons remain one of the most severe violations of human rights and is often a hidden crime. Addressing this challenge effectively requires a comprehensive approach that cooperation, prevention, detection, and investigation of crimes, as well as protection of and assistance to victims of trafficking. To date, Kazakhstan is a party of over 60 multilateral international human rights treaties, including 13 that are directly related to combating these forms of slavery. My country aligned itself with the OSCE action plan to combating trafficking of human beings adopted in 2003 and remains firmly committed to its implementation. We also recognize the importance of the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking of Human Rights as a significant international standard of a fight against trafficking in persons. Kazakhstan is currently updating its national action plan for 2027-2029. This process is led by Ministry of Internal Affairs together with Ministry of Labor and Social Protection, with the Integrity Commission ensuring strong coordination among all stakeholders, including the OSCE Program Office in Astana. Dear colleagues, a key milestone was the adoption in 2024, 2 years ago, a law on combating trafficking of human beings, based on the nationally recognized 3-4 approach: partnership, prevention, prosecution, and protection of victims, which for the first time keeps an international definition of trafficking in persons, including essential elements such as use of threats, of violence, deception, and enforcement. The law was also incorporates provisions of key international instruments, including the Palermo Protocol, the Convention on Forced or Compulsory Labor, the optional protocol of the Convention of Rights of Child on the sale of children, as well as the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking of Human Beings. This new legislation guarantees victims' rights to medical, social, legal, and physiological assistance, as well as compensations. The government has expanded the network of shelters and increased funding for services, allocated more than 420,000 euros for their implementations. Following the adoption of the law, 19 secondary legislations have been developed by relevant state authorities to ensure its effective implementations. In addition, 14 training seminars have been organized, bringing together over 200 participants. According to last year report of the United States Department of State, Kazakhstan has demonstrated overall increased efforts on combat trafficking in persons compared to the previous reporting period. This includes an increase in the number of convictions for trafficking-related offenses and identified victims, the adoption of a new law, which I mentioned before, as well as a strengthened efforts to screen population groups for indicated of trafficking. In addition, rules for the referral of trafficking victims for the assistance and provisions of special social services has been approved. It is important to note that Kazakhstan remains in tier number 2, together with other countries from the region. At the same time, there has been an increase of investigations. You can see it on the screen, 44 cases compared to 15 of previous years, and et cetera, et cetera. Standards, operation procedures, and referral mechanism for victims identification has been developed and implemented. Mobile outreach teams and inspections of vulnerable groups has been also intensified, enabling more timely responses to cases of exploitation. According to the assessment of the Department of State, the most vulnerable groups include rural residents, undocumented migrants, individuals without identified documents, the unemployment, homeless persons, and persons with disabilities. Kazakhstan intends to continue its active work in implementation of the recommendation of US Department, including those reflected to the Government Action Plan for 2024-2026. Dear colleagues, we also acknowledge the timely and pressing issue to the rise of forced criminality as a dimension of trafficking in persons that continues to require increased attention. For Kazakhstan, this issue is particularly relevant as our citizens are increasingly exposed to risk in regions such as so-called Golden Triangle and countries in the Arab Peninsula. In one recent case involving a Kazakh national, the initial response by relevant bodies was not fully effective. This experience provided an important lesson and prompted us to take concrete corrective measures. In cooperation with OSCE, we have developed a practical algorithm of actions aimed for strengthening the capacity of our foreign missions. This tool is designed to support the identification, referral, and protection of victims of trafficking. Based on this framework, a series of targeted training seminars has been conducted for consulars officers of the Kazakhstan embassies, particularly in the countries that I have mentioned before. In addition, a dedicated instructional video is currently being developed in cooperation with Academy of Minister for Internal Affairs to ensure a clear and simple, consistent understanding of these procedures among relevant persons. As rightly noted by OSCE Special Representative, Dr. Carrie Johnson, protecting victims and preventing trafficking requires both strong policies and well-equipped practitioners. Guided by this principle, Kazakhstan remains fully committed to further strengthening its national responses and enhancing practical capacities. We highly value our cooperation with OSCE as an organization and will be pleased to welcome Dr. Johnson to Kazakhstan this summer to continue our dialogue and further strengthen our shared efforts in combating trafficking in human beings. Last but not least, I would like to thank separately Ms. Dina Zhuzbayeva, Human Dimension Program Associated of OSCE Program Office in Astana, who now here with us in this hall, in this building, who works in Kazakhstan 24/7. Thank you very much. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for highlighting not only Kazakhstan's efforts, including in the difficult area of forced criminality, but also the partnership with the OSCE, both here in Vienna as well as our colleagues in Astana and Dina in particular. So now, before we turn to our final keynote speaker, I would like to again move our attention online for a short video screening. This production that we're about to see is taken from a virtual reality series portraying young teens, and it's been produced and generously shared with us by Cornerstone Productions, who specialize in virtual reality. I will note that the language and the setting are very realistic. So this is not appropriate for young audiences. Just be prepared. ICT, please, over to you.
Sorry, mate. Oh, fuck. Joseph, you coming in? Who the fuck is Joseph? My name's Joe.
What are you looking for? Can I help? What are you doing?
Isn't it obvious?
What have you done to it?
It wasn't me.
You want to use mine? What happened?
Nothing. I just need to tell him.
Have you been speaking to him? You know he's no good.
I can do what I like. He's my fucking dad and I'm his fucking son.
Hey, what you saying, fam? You're my cousin Zach, yeah?
Alright, what are you saying?
Well, give me a chip.
Oh, today's been long. You look at my phone, it's fucked me. Oh, that's my guy, yeah? Shut up. Yo! Who you saying, fam? Shit, that thing is broke. Oh, I need a new one, mate. Fuck knows how. One like this? Yeah, man, that's sick.
Wait, that's better than that Nokia shit you got, yeah?
Oh, that's just for work, innit? My man can help you get one like that. You're safe. I'll put a good word in with the boss, man. Just do a couple jobs, easy shit. They'll hook you up.
Got an upgrade. Don't mess this up.
Oh, yo. What are you saying, fam? Yes, my bro.
Online, man.
Bless.
Hit it, man.
Sweet. You right, NG?
I'm full of cold, darling.
Yeah? Oh, well, the pharmacy's here for you.
Thank you.
It's alright. Yes, my brother. What are you saying? That's what this is all about, innit? This should just make people feel better. See this, yeah? Check this fucking shit. 1,000 quid this is. It's fucking tiny, right? That's gonna make you and me a lot of money. It's gonna keep our families blessed. And that is our job, my brother. It's what a real man's got to do, innit? But this year, this is your lot. Oh, before you leave here, you hide this, like my boys told you, yeah? And listen, ain't no opportunities out there. Me, I'm giving you your chance right now because I believe in you. Just don't let me down yet.
You've got the stuff and you've got somewhere to hide it, right? Don't look so nervous. People can see that. I got your back, bruv. Listen, that new phone I got you, that's all yours. But you never call or text me on that, okay? You just follow the instructions. And if you see the feds, don't fucking panic. You don't come to me, You say nothing to no one. You got this?
So that gives us a little food for thought, and especially heading into the next panel, where we'll talk a little bit more about the realities of how forced criminality can start. For those of you that are here with us in person, you'll have the opportunity to test this virtual reality just outside in the hall where you came in. You can immerse yourself in different scenarios like this one here that was portraying Joe. And now let me give the floor to our last keynote speaker for today, who is award-winning expert by experience consultant Sosa Henkoma. He champions survivor-led change. Sosa, we are very happy to have you here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Can everyone hear me? And thank you to the OSCE for having me too. So I would like to start with, in 2024, I was sitting in a car with a friend when the blue lights appeared behind us. I am a survivor of forced criminality. I've been through the National Referral Mechanism, the NRM. I am actively involved in this sector, working with many of you to change the system. But when those officers ran my name through the system, they didn't see a survivor. They didn't see the years of work I've done or the trauma I've overcome. They saw a firearm warning. They saw a dangerous person. In that moment, I wasn't an advocate. I wasn't a success story. To the system, I was still just a threat to be managed. That is the blind spot we are here to discuss today. The system talks about criminality as if it's a series of choices. But let me tell you about the things I never chose. I never chose for my parents to abandon me. I never chose to be abused by my stepmom. I never chose to be in the hands of social services. And I certainly never chose to travel over 3,000 miles away from everything I've ever known, my culture, my family, and my education. In the blink of an eye, the person I left behind the person I was left behind. I was thrust into a new environment where I didn't just have to live, I had to survive. When we talk about exploitation, we need to be clear. This isn't a choice. Forced criminality is the hidden face of human trafficking. It is what happens when people are tricked, pressured, or threatened into committing crimes for the profit of someone else. I come from a world that is invisible to the naked eye. Yet, it happens in plain sight, all around us. For 11 years, from the age of 11 to 21, I was exploited. For over a decade, no one saw a victim. Instead, social care saw a problem. They labeled me aggressive because I hadn't been taught emotional intelligence. I was a child who didn't understand the trauma I was living through, so I lashed out. The criminal justice saw a violent criminal. They couldn't see the invisible strings of an exploiter pulling my arms. They couldn't hear the whisper in my ears telling me the world is already against you. The immigration system saw a burden. They didn't see someone to protect. they saw a problem to deport. I have walked through every system we have, and I left each one with a label, but never the label of a victim. The world likes things to be black and white. In other forms of trafficking, the victim is often easy to spot. But forced criminality lives in the grey area. Police are told to uphold the law and protect the people. But who protects the person forced to break the law, while the person pulling the string stays in the shadows? We cannot address this without looking at the root, deep-rooted in trauma. When we blame and shame survivors, we add to that trauma. We create a wall that keeps survivors from engaging. Even today, I live with the shame every time I apply for a visa. Every time I ran a DBS check. Every time I am stopped by police is a fresh reminder of all the crimes I was forced to commit. If you need the numbers to understand the scale, here's the reality. Approximately 17% of identified trafficking victims in the OSCE region are trafficked for forced criminality. In 2015, there were only 10 recorded cases. By 2024, that number rose to 198. The UN's 2024 Global Trafficking in Person report shows this is deeply gendered issue. In 2022, 68% of child victims and 24% of adult victims were of forced criminality were male. We are seeing a clear pattern of forced criminality, particularly in the Western and Southern Europe. Yet, our system are still looking for a perfect victim that does not exist in this space. There is a dangerous misconception that leaving exploitation is like flipping a switch. People think a positive NRM decision means you are safe. It does not. Changing my life and becoming a recognized survivor has in reality placed me in greater danger I have ever faced. Exploitation doesn't just switch off. I have sleepless nights. I have restrictions on my travel and work. I feel a daily sense of insecurity, even as I raise my children. My criminal record is still smeared with the actions of my exploiters. Why is a child still held criminally accountable for what they were forced to do? This piece of document is a chain I still carry. My immigration solicitor once told me, if you want to see a change in the world, you have to become that change. I am standing here today, sharing my trauma and my blind spots, because I am trying to be that change, but I cannot do it alone. We need to create space where survivors can be open without fear of being blamed for their own exploitation. We must move past the labels. We must look into the gray areas. We must see the human behind the criminal record. We must move past the labels. I encourage everyone in this room, don't just study it. Don't just study the change. Don't just write reports about the change. Become it. Embrace it. Today, I would like to end this with a poem, which is in this document, which I've done with the OSCE, and I'm very proud of it too, because one of the first ones. And that poem says, "Freedom has never been a single shape to me. For some, it is the moment they slip out of the hands that once held them down. For others, it is the first breath taken far from an environment that bruised their spirit. Sometimes freedom is simply the right to steer your own life without apology, to choose your direction without fear of being pulled back. Freedom shifts, it stretches. It belongs to each person differently. But for me, freedom is something softer, something deeper. It is the shedding of every label ever placed on my skin. The ones whispered, the ones shouted, the ones that I tried to wear just to survive. It is stepping out from under all of the definitions and discovering who I am when no one is naming me. My freedom is quiet. Fierce act of being myself without permission, without explanation, without a single box to fit into. It is the moment I realize I am not what the world called me. I am who I choose to become. And I choose to be free from all labels. So thank you for hearing me today. And that's me.
Thank you so much, Sosa, for sharing your powerful words with us and for partnering with the OSCE. This is you being the change and turning your own exploitation and trauma into change to prevent others from going through the same experience. So thank you very much for working with us and for being here today. With that, we will now take a short technical break to welcome the first panel. I invite everyone to stay in the room and in your space. And then once we come back, I will hand over to our moderator, but we will do a quick change up here at the head table. We are about to start panel one, so if we could ask those in the room to please take your seats. That. All right, ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, I think we're going to go ahead and dive into panel one. We're already, as you probably noticed, a little behind schedule. So this panel, we will aim to end at 5 o'clock. So now I have the pleasure of handing over the floor to our moderator, award-winning journalist and sound artist Phoebe McIndoe. Is that how you pronounce your last name? McIndoe, who has produced work for the BBC and The Guardian, and her work has brought much needed attention to hidden forms of exploitation and criminality, making her particularly well placed to guide this discussion. Phoebe, the floor is yours.
Hello and welcome everyone, distinguished guests. Thank you for being here today for this panel. I'm partly here in the capacity of a journalist and also partly here because my younger brother, aged 11, was criminally exploited into county lines drug trafficking networks in the UK. He's 22 now and it's still ongoing. So as you can imagine, it's a very complex issue. It feels funny for me to be here today talking to a room full of people who are making change when I know that he is still in the thick of this kind of exploitative process. So thank you. Today in this panel, we have an amazing array of experts. And we're going to be looking again at some of these questions of criminality and victimhood that you heard Sosa speak so eloquently about in his keynote speech. For timing reasons, I'm going to go directly into the introduction of our panel. We are very lucky today to have Siobhan Mullally, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. We have Sarkin Kabibula, a lived experience expert and researcher on trafficking in cyber scam compounds. He has a focus on Central Asia. We have Gail Oritz, Deputy Public Prosecutor within France, the Interregional Specialized Jurisdiction. I'm sorry, everyone, if I'm butchering your names. Livia Wagner, sitting to my side, the Chief of Staff, Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, Analyzing and Countering Illicit Economies. And we have Marta Johansson on our far right over here, the Associate Professor and Head of Research at Örebro University in Sweden, specializing in criminal law and human trafficking. So they're all going to get a chance to speak today before we give the floor for comments and questions. I'd like to start with Siobhan Mullally. My question for you is from an international legal perspective. How clearly is trafficking for forced criminality addressed within the existing frameworks that we have? And where do the main gaps remain when it comes to states' criminal justice priorities and human rights obligations? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Special Representative Carrie Johnston, moderator Phoebe, and Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to address the topic of trafficking in persons for forced criminality. And I want to thank in particular the survivors who are presenting and sharing their expertise through their lived experience and ongoing research. Thank you in particular to Sosa and Sakan. The global nature of trafficking in persons for forced criminality, while not new, the scale and reach of it and the accompanying human rights violations are of grave concern. The globally recognized definition of trafficking in persons, as set out in the Palermo Protocol and incorporated into multiple domestic legal systems, as well as in regional legal systems, allows for the recognition of a range of forms of trafficking in persons, including forced criminality, because the purposes of exploitation listed are a minimum, so it's not an exhaustive list. So our normative frameworks at international and regional level do cover trafficking for purposes of forced criminality. Even where it's not explicitly listed as such, it is covered and included. However, that is not always followed through in practice, and that is where the difficulty arises. And the normative frameworks at domestic level are often unevenly implemented. The provisions differ. How the legal definition is applied is quite uneven, and that leads to significant confusion in practice, and it contributes to significant gaps and failings at domestic level, meaning that there is less awareness on the part of law enforcement authorities of the nature of trafficking for forced criminality as a form of trafficking, less awareness on the part of the judiciary, and on the part of actors involved in national referral mechanisms. Is trafficking for forced criminality properly recognized within national referral mechanisms? Not always. The failure to explicitly recognize forced criminality as a purpose of exploitation in some jurisdictions can also hinder the application of the non-punishment principle, which is essential to a human rights and victim-centered response and is a core obligation of human rights law, also essential to the right to a fair trial. And failing to explicitly recognize forced criminality leads to gaps in terms of early identification and recognition of this type of trafficking. That means in practice that perpetrators escape accountability and the effectiveness of investigations are limited, and victims and survivors are left without remedies and without access to justice and are in fact often punished. We know that we have organized criminal networks involved in trafficking for forced criminality, but also less formal networks, and often more challenging is the involvement of family networks. At a global level, we know that the significant involvement of organized crimes groups operating at a transnational scale, including in relation to online criminal exploitation, poses very serious challenges for evidence gathering and for victim and witness protection. These challenges are linked to the increasing sophistication of such criminal activities, the use of encryption and anonymization technologies that allow organized criminal networks and less formal networks to operate in significant secrecy and often to evade detection. We also see limits in terms of the effectiveness of international cooperation, adversely affecting the quality of investigations, including more limited mutual legal assistance, and as a consequence, more limited access to justice and to effective remedies for victims and survivors. These challenges were highlighted recently at the Human Rights Council at its 61st session in an event hosted by the Republic of Korea and multiple other member states, highlighting the rise of so-called scam centers across the ASEAN region in particular, but also globally affecting other regions, the African region, Europe, and the Americas. And the UN special procedures, including my mandate as Special Rapporteur in Trafficking in Persons, had highlighted through an early warning in 2023 the scale of this problem, the thousands of victims affected, in some instances hundreds of thousands of victims across the ASEAN region. And also the accompanying very serious human rights violations, including physical violence, sexual violence, arbitrary detention, and refoulement. And what we also saw is a weakness in terms of the rule of law, the links to the scale of corruption, deeply rooted fears of reprisals and widespread impunity, and the lack of assistance and protection for victims, including lack of medical and legal aid and lack of access to compensation. We also need to be aware, of course, that forced criminality takes a range of forms. It can include drugs offences that challenge the public interest in accountability, and often more challenging forms of criminality linked to the activities of non-state armed groups, including designated terrorist groups. And here we need to recognise the potential application of international criminal law and international humanitarian law. If we look, for example, at the particular situation of thousands of children, including girls and boys recruited to northeast Syria and alleged engagement in criminal and potentially terrorist activities by ISIL or Daesh, we see repeated failures to apply the core obligations of human rights law, as applied in the context of trafficking and heightened in the context of child trafficking. And I want to conclude with just 3 points. First, with regard to the norm of non-discrimination. The application and implementation of international law on trafficking in persons is often deeply gendered and also racialized, intersecting with gender and migration status and often disability status. Boys and young men are not considered to be vulnerable. They're often not believed, not considered to be credible. And girls and young women from minoritized communities or in situations of irregular migration are more likely to be considered a threat, victims, rather than as victims with the right to protection and to effective remedies. The pending proceedings before the European Court of Human Rights in the case of Shamima Begum versus the UK raised significant questions about the scope of the non-punishment principle, which have been communicated by the court, including whether the deprivation of citizenship can be considered as a punishment or a penalty within the scope of the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention. So we need to recognise that criminal activities, including in the context of trafficking for forced criminality, may include serious criminal offences that engage concerns of national security. And we also need to recognise that the rights of victims of trafficking arising under international and regional human rights law, covered by the prohibition of slavery and forced labour, are non-derogable. It is critical to recall the non-derogable nature of the rights protected, including in the context of trafficking for forced criminality, and to apply the obligation of non-discrimination, noting that the prohibition of racial discrimination is a jus cogens norm, a peremptory norm of international law. We also need to recognise that the prohibition of discrimination on grounds of disability, and we have identified that persons with disabilities are often targeted for trafficking for forced criminality, and that imposes positive obligations on the state of identification and assistance and ensuring effective access to justice for victims and survivors with disabilities. However, what we see is implementation of obligations with regard to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability in the context of trafficking remains very weak. The second point is just with regard to the non-punishment principle. That is essential to ensuring early identification of victims. It is core to the object and purpose of the Palermo Protocol and recognised under international and regional human rights law, including in the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights in AN and VCL versus the UK concerning drugs offences and child victims of trafficking from Vietnam. Importantly, the court there recognised that the non-punishment principle is integral to the right to a fair trial, arising under Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Implementation, however, requires going beyond the normative frameworks to ensure that the protections are practical and effective. That means wiping clean criminal records, including clean slate provisions are implemented, vacature of criminal records, which impact, as we've heard very powerfully from SOSA, how that impacts on access to employment, on professional training, on education, on freedom of movement. We also need to ensure that measures to remove and compensate for the imposition unlawfully of administered fines and other forms of punishment are effective. Non-punishment also applies in the context of criminality that may occur in the context of migration, including irregular migration. And current migration governance, border control measures, and the expansion of accelerated border and asylum procedures raise very serious risks of failing to identify incidents of trafficking for forced criminality and ultimately to punishing rather than protecting victims. Along with other UN special procedures, I have highlighted concerns in relation to the EU Migration and Asylum Pact, for example, but also similar concerns in other regions, including to potential failures to recognise and protect child victims of trafficking for forced criminality leading to consequences of arbitrary detention and potentially to refoulement. And finally, again, to reiterate the opening comments of Special Representative Johnston, the human rights response is not at odds with or in tension with a criminal justice approach, properly understood. The human rights response and recognition and implementation of human rights law is essential to effective investigations and to accountability. Victim participation enhances effective investigations. If we do not effectively recognize, investigate, and punish trafficking for forced criminality, we end up in a situation where perpetrators escape accountability and victims and survivors are punished rather than protected and their rights ensured. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. And thank you for drawing our attention there to the scale of the trafficking. I mean, you touched on corruption, the range of forms of criminality, but also the difficulties of implementation. And finally, what you said about wiping the slate clean, I thought was really powerful. Thank you. We're going to pass the floor over to Sarkin Kabibula on your left. Sarkin, I'm wondering if you can answer this question based on your research and your lived experience in trafficking with cyber scam operations. How do you see this affecting the OSCE region? And also, it would be interesting to hear about the key indicators that authorities and practitioners often miss when identifying victims in these contexts. The next answer will be in Russian, so if you don't speak Russian, it's time to put on your headphones. Thank you.
Благодарю за возможность сказать и быть выслушанным. Ответ на ваш вопрос, наверное, будет в моем докладе. Прежде всего, я хотел бы начать с того, чтобы показать всем. Это является меткой, которую я получил в первый день по прибытию в Юго-Восточную Азию, в регион, именно в преступный город Кей-Парк. Для меня эта татуировка как символ того, что я жил в роли чужой собственности. Я находился в данном преступном городке 367 дней. Я каждый день считал эти дни. Как я попал туда? По вопросу трудоустройства. Вакансия была размещена на самом популярном сайте по поиску работы в моей стране. Объявление выглядело абсолютно обычно. Привлекательная зарплата, стандартные условия, и ничто не вызывало у меня подозрений. Именно так работает вербовка. Она невидима до момента, когда уже слишком поздно. Я вернулся 9 месяцев назад. После освобождения, в первом месяце я на безвозмездной основе помогал выявлять граждан Казахстана, перешедших на сторону скам-центров. Четкого алгоритма, поддержки и дальнейших действий у меня не было. Не было ни времени, ни условий для адаптации к обычной жизни и своевременной психологической помощи. После того, как я начал говорить об этом открыто, мне стали поступать угрозы. Неизвестные фотографировали мой дом в городе Астана. За мою голову была объявлена награда в $50 000 от структур, связанных с Кей-Парком. Также я столкнулся с социально-экономическими трудностями. После возвращения все мои долговые обязательства сохранились в полном объеме. Испорченная кредитная история стала дополнительным барьером для реинтеграции. До сих пор испытываю потребность в профессиональной психологической поддержке. Нахожу смысл в помощи другим, предупреждая людей о рисках криминальной эксплуатации. И также хотел отметить, часть пострадавших возвращается в скам-центры добровольно. Как считаю я, причинами могут быть ПТСР, синдром зависимости от среды, либо стокгольмский синдром. Также я выявил проблемы системы защиты пострадавших. Далеко не все пострадавшие получают официальный статус жертвы и соответствующую поддержку. Я в их числе. Я до сих пор официально не признан жертвой торговли людьми. По свидетельствам других пострадавших, во многих странах, таких как Россия, Кыргызстан, Таджикистан, Узбекистан, Беларусь, Украина, к вернувшимся относятся как к преступникам, а не как к жертвам. Принцип ненаказания пострадавших должен неукоснительно соблюдаться, потому что большинство из нас действовало под принуждением. Что касается масштаба проблемы, скам-центры – это не единичные случаи. По различным оценкам, только в Юго-Восточной Азии в условиях принудительного труда в киберпреступных организациях удерживаются сотни тысяч человек из десятков стран. Среди пострадавших – граждане Казахстана, России, Украины, Кыргызстана, Узбекистана и многих других государств, участников ОБСЕ. Они все находились там со мной. И хочу донести, что это не проблема одной страны или одного региона, это глобальная угроза, требующая скоординированного международного ответа. Нужно законодательно закрепить принцип ненаказания жертв торговли людьми во всех государствах-участниках ОБСЕ. Необходимо разработать единый протокол реинтеграции, психологическая помощь, юридическое сопровождение, содействие в трудоустройстве с первого дня после возвращения. И необходимо упростить и ускорить процедуру признания статуса жертвы. Бюрократические барьеры не должны становиться вторым наказанием для пострадавших. Также необходимо наладить межгосударственное сотрудничество по выявлению, розыску и возвращению граждан, удерживаемых в скам-центрах. Хотя бы обязать платформы по поиску работы, внедрить механизмы верификации работодателей и предупреждения о рисках при подозрительных вакансиях. Скам-центры существуют не только в Юго-Восточной Азии, как вы все знаете, но и в зоне ответственности ОБСЕ. СМИ должны уделять этой теме значительно больше внимания. Информации для широкой аудитории, особенно для молодежи, ее катастрофически не хватает. Необходимо разъяснять механизмы вербовки и эксплуатации, в том числе случаи принудительного употребления психоактивных веществ. Когда я находился там, нас также накачивали наркотиками. Я подвергся физическим и психологическим пыткам, подвергался им систематически. В заключение хочу сказать, что моя жизнь продолжается. Планирую поступить на юридический факультет, потому что убежден, что право должно защищать людей. Готов выступать в будущем в качестве эксперта и делиться своим опытом на ваших площадках. И я обращаюсь к каждому из вас лично. У вас есть мандаты и инструменты, которых нет у меня. Используйте их. Примите конкретные решения, а не декларации. Каждый день промедления – это новые люди, которые исчезают так же, как я. Благодарю всех за возможность рассказать и быть услышанным. Я закончил.
Thank you so much, Sakan, for sharing your experiences there. I think it's so courageous to be here in this room sharing today. And as you say, this isn't an isolated issue, but it's one that hopefully all of the different agents in this room can work together to solve. I think it was really powerful that you mentioned the threats, the debt bondage, the psychological torture that you had to endure. And again, a similar comment as Sosa made in his speech, that you don't just flick the switch and this is over. You live with the PTSD, but here you are making something brilliant. So thank you. We're going to pass the floor now to Gail. Gail, I'd love to ask you, this is another headphone moment. From a prosecutorial standpoint, what makes cases of forced criminality particularly difficult to investigate and prosecute? And maybe you can tell us why. Thank you.
Bonjour à tous. Alors effectivement, je suis au parquet de Marseille. Alors une petite précision, je suis vice-procureur et pas procureure adjointe, peu importe. Donc j'appartiens au parquet de Marseille. Je travaille sous l'autorité du procureur de la République de Marseille. Et mon service, la juridiction interrégionale spécialisée, est compétente en matière de criminalité organisée, de grande criminalité organisée et les dossiers de grande complexité. Nos cibles, c'est ce qu'on appelle le haut du spectre, c'est-à-dire les dirigeants et les organisateurs de ces clans criminels, essentiellement tournés vers le trafic de stupéfiants, œuvrant depuis l'ensemble du territoire national, qu'ils soient libres ou incarcérés ou depuis l'étranger. D'autres services au sein du parquet de Marseille traitent du trafic de stupéfiants par un autre prisme et par là où il se manifeste, c'est-à-dire dans les cités des quartiers nord de Marseille. Il faut comprendre qu'à Marseille, et cette description vaut désormais pour toute la France, puisque ce mode de fonctionnement s'étend à toute la France, mais je vais parler de Marseille. Le trafic de stupéfiants se concentre à Marseille essentiellement sur les cités du quartier nord de Marseille, de la ville, dans des ensembles immobiliers qui sont en réalité des habitations à loyer modéré, en principe gérées par des bailleurs sociaux. Ces cités, et je fais ce détour parce que je ne ferai pas exception aux autres intervenants, ces cités sont dans un état déplorable d'insalubrité et de dégradation. Les bailleurs sociaux ont pour beaucoup abandonné la gestion de ces ensembles immobiliers. Les personnes qui y vivent, dès qu'elles accèdent à un revenu un peu supérieur, s'en vont de ces ensembles immobiliers. Des appartements sont donc libérés, personne ne les occupe par la suite, et c'est le trafic de stupéfiants, le réseau criminel qui s'installe dans ces cités et qui enferme les habitants dans cette cité. Ensemble immobilier où désormais les services publics, forces de l'ordre, services de secours, même services sociaux, ont de plus en plus de difficultés à entrer parce que il y a de véritables checkpoints à l'entrée de ces cités qui entravent l'entrée de ces services. Pourquoi je vous dis ça? Parce que la population qui y réside désormais est une population qui est dans une extrême précarité économique et sociale, et que les réseaux de trafic de stupéfiants utilisent en qualité de ce qu'on appelle, nous, les petites mains du trafic, c'est-à-dire les vendeurs, les guetteurs, ceux qui ont pour charge de prévenir l'arrivée des services de police pour éviter toute saisie de drogue et d'argent, et les nourrices de cité qui sont, j'y reviendrai, obligés de stocker dans leurs appartements le stupéfiant qui va se vendre sur une journée ou 2 journées. Ce ne sont pas des grosses quantités. Les très grosses quantités sont stockées à l'extérieur de la cité. Et les armes, puisque alors, vous le savez ou vous ne le savez pas, Marseille a fait l'objet et fait l'objet depuis des années de guerres entre clans criminels qui s'affrontent et qui se font des guerres à l'arme lourde, à l'arme de guerre, et qui attaquent les points de vente appartenant aux clans adverses en tirant sur quiconque se trouve sur ce plan de vente pour semer la terreur et vider ce point de vente de toute sa substance. C'est ce que nous avons connu en 2023. 50 morts à Marseille, plus de 100 blessés dans ces guerres. Et c'est ce qui en fait des points extrêmement dangereux. Donc, les réseaux stockent des armes dans la cité pour pouvoir se défendre contre les clans criminels adverses. Ces petites mains, je vous ai dressé le profil économique et social de ces habitants, de ces résidents. Ces petites mains, elles entrent apparemment volontairement dans le trafic de stupéfiants, mais par contrainte économique, et ne peuvent plus en sortir. Si les membres émettent le souhait d'en sortir, c'est là que les choses se compliquent, puisqu'ils sont, dans le meilleur des cas, menacés. Dans le pire des cas, une habitude régulière consiste à inventer une dette à cette petite main, soit en inventant un trou dans la comptabilité, soit en le rendant responsable d'une saisie policière, d'une interpellation et d'une saisie des forces de l'ordre. À partir de là, la victime est obligée de continuer à travailler pour le réseau gratuitement, puisqu'elle est à l'origine d'une dette. Et si elle émet encore une volonté de ne pas se plier aux règles du réseau, alors, et nous avons beaucoup de dossiers de ce type, elle est séquestrée dans des caves et elle subit des actes de torture et de barbarie avec des agressions sexuelles, voire des viols commis avec des objets divers et variés, des armes parfois, des bâtons. Elles sont laissées parfois nues plusieurs heures, plusieurs jours. Et quand elles sont libérées, c'est pour travailler sur le réseau uniquement. Elles sont en dehors des heures, et pas seulement celles qui sont torturées et ou agressées, mais la plupart du temps, les victimes et les petites mains du réseau, hors les nourrices qui, évidemment, continuent à vivre dans leurs appartements, les guetteurs et les vendeurs sont souvent retenus dans des appartements dont je vous expliquais qu'ils avaient été abandonnés par les anciens locataires, qui sont totalement repris par le réseau et qui logent les victimes en dehors des heures de travail, si je puis m'exprimer ainsi, les heures de vente et de surveillance des points de vente. Ces petites mains, juridiquement, si elles sont interpellées en action de travail, sont passibles des peines prévues pour l'acquisition, détention, transport, offre ou cession de stupéfiants et complicité des infractions punies en France de 10 ans d'emprisonnement au maximum. Et ces petites mains ont, je vous l'ai dit, un profil très particulier. Donc, des habitants de la cité, je vous en ai parlé, qui vivent avec leur famille, des mineurs et des majeurs. Alors, on en a de plus en plus qui viennent d'autres villes de France dans des situations aussi de précarité et qui viennent à Marseille parce que les offres d'emploi sur les réseaux sociaux sont alléchantes, puisque à Marseille, on est payé bien plus qu'ailleurs, étant donné la dangerosité de se trouver sur un point de vente ciblé par les clans criminels adverses, des mineurs non accompagnés et des personnes majeures en situation irrégulière sur le territoire national. Et ces deux dernières catégories, évidemment, sont logées au sein de la cité dans des appartements qui sont abandonnés par les bailleurs sociaux. Et nous tombons de ce fait, par tout ce que je viens de vous décrire, dans l'infraction qui est punie par le Code de procédure pénale de traite d'êtres humains, qui peut être aggravée quand elle est commise en bande organisée et qui devient un crime, donc quand elle est aggravée, passible de peine criminelle et jugée devant la cour d'assises désormais spécialement composée depuis la loi de juin 2025. L'essentiel des difficultés que l'on rencontre, puisque désormais, le parquet de Marseille a décidé d'ouvrir des cadres juridiques, des enquêtes préliminaires sur cette infraction de traite d'êtres humains. L'essentiel des difficultés qu'on rencontre, c'est le refus catégorique des victimes de témoigner. Alors, premièrement, par peur de reconnaître des infractions pénalement répréhensibles, mais c'est pas la plus grosse, la plus grosse des difficultés, essentiellement par peur des représailles. Je vous l'ai dit, je vous le redis, ça, pour une ville comme Marseille, c'est énorme, 50 morts en 2023, le nombre le plus important que la France ait jamais connu en matière de criminalité organisée, des actes de torture et de barbarie, des gens qui sont torturés, tués, et dont le corps est incendié, abandonné dans des véhicules. Les victimes qui ont leur famille dans ces cités ne veulent pas témoigner. Quand elles sont libérées par les forces de l'ordre, parce que un signalement nous est parvenu de leur enlèvement et de leur séquestration, elles vont éventuellement oralement aux services de l'ordre primo-intervenants qui vont venir les délivrer, expliquer ce qu'elles ont subi, mais quand elles seront reconvoquées pour être entendues et pour faire l'objet d'un examen médico-légal, elles ne se représenteront pas. Ou si elles se représentent, diront qu'elles ne savent pas pourquoi elles ont subi ce qu'elles ont subi et qu'elles n'ont reconnu personne, que les personnes étaient cagoulées, ce qui est peut-être vrai, mais qu'elles ne savent absolument pas de qui il s'agit. Et c'est une des difficultés essentielles pour mener des enquêtes à bien, pour monter des procédures qui permettraient d'attraire ces gérants de terrain. Évidemment, ce ne sont pas nos cibles à nous, hauts du spectre, qui recrutent ces petites mains, ce sont leurs relais. Vous le savez, le trafic de stupéfiants est extrêmement hiérarchisé, pyramidal. Donc, c'est les relais sur place qui recrutent ces petites mains et qui font, commettent sur eux tous les crimes et délits que je viens de vous décrire. notre principale difficulté, c'est celle-là. Et pour l'heure, c'est difficile de trouver un moyen de la contourner parce que nous ne disposons pas du maillage national associatif qui permettrait de mettre en sécurité et à l'abri la victime et sa famille qui vit dans la cité, comme on en dispose en matière d'exploitation sexuelle. Aujourd'hui, on a en France un maillage associatif qui permet à n'importe quelle heure du jour et de la nuit, n'importe quel jour de la semaine, d'avoir un contact avec une association localement qui est en mesure de prendre en charge la victime, de la mettre en sécurité, ainsi que sa famille. Ça n'existe pas pour cette criminalité forcée en matière de trafic de stupéfiants, ce qui explique bien évidemment le refus des victimes de porter plainte, de dénoncer ce qu'elles subissent. Voilà l'essentiel de ce que je pouvais vous dire aujourd'hui.
Thank you so much, Gail, for again raising this subject of the family and what a central issue that is as to why victims don't want to come forward and share their experiences. I'm really curious to see how we begin to kind of navigate around that. And I have to share that even going through it with my brother, we would have people coming to the house and breaking in the thick of his involvement, and it was really scary, and you're left feeling very powerless. So thank you for raising that. Livia, we're going to move to you now to look through an organized crime lens, and we're going to be talking about profit. How do organized criminal networks profit from forced criminality? How has the model evolved in recent years, but also how does it converge into other forms of crime? And perhaps you can talk a bit about what opportunities are being missed from a security perspective when victims are not identified and protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank very much for the invitation, and our sincere thanks go to the OSCE Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, as well as the Swiss chairpersonship, because we feel that it's very important to convene such an important discussion and to bring like a focused attention for trafficking for the forced purpose of criminality. So for us at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, it's a privilege to contribute not only to this panel, but also to the wider alliance discussion. And we at the GTOC, we increasingly see that one of the most dangerous blind spots in trafficking responses is when these human exploitations intersect with illicit economies. So what I would like to focus on today in my presentation is basically how cyber-enabled scams and other criminal markets are driving new forms of human trafficking, but also why many victims are criminalized rather than being protected, how this is converging with other forms of human trafficking and other forms of organized crime, and why these present both a human rights failure and a security failure. I am going, yes, it's working very good. So looking at the global trends, what we have seen in our research is that we look at the cyber scams globally, and basically three things stand out. First is the scale. So this is an industry that requires tens of thousands of workers. Second is the violence. So behind what often looks like an online crime, cyber-enabled crime, there are the physical forms of the coercion. So we're talking about torture, we're talking about threats to family members, what we have already heard today. And third is the normalization. So for a long time, because of a lack of awareness, but also, frankly, like a disbelief, allowed that this sector was able to expand with limited enforcement pressure. And what we're witnessing is not just the fraud, but also the converging of the ecosystem. So we're talking about organized crime, trafficking in persons, and human rights abuse. Yes. So Scam Centers Global is through our research, we have identified that this is happening across 6 continents and scam operations in more than 30 countries. So this is not an exhaustive list, it's just illustrative. But the point is that it's a global phenomenon and adapting to local context and governance gaps and enforcement priorities. So this is important because what we want to say here is that the responses can not only be taken regionally, and no country should assume that it is immune. So when talking about these scam compounds, let me just briefly explain what we mean by that. And so they're like these physical spaces, often large-scale developments, and that are designed and repurposed for online activity and structured to control the movement. What is also striking in our research is that they're not hidden. Sometimes they exist in plain sight. And there are some security features that like barbed wire or surveillance and often presented as protection, but operationally, they are there to keep people inside. And when looking at these 6 multipliers, so the question is, why are these operations so effective? And what makes them so resilient? I'm going to speak now or highlight 3. So first, we're talking about a networked criminal structure. And so many scam groups, they operate like multinational enterprises and with a core leadership and multiple like branches across the different jurisdictions. Then second, of course, very important here, technology. So we're talking about AI, we're talking about deep fakes, automated translation, cloned apps, and crime as a service model. And they have dramatically lowered the barriers to entry. And third, and critically here is the political protection. So across the regions, scam centers flourish where corruption enables the protection. And that ranges from the passive tolerance to active collusion. And without this, just to be very clear, operations of this scale simply could not persist. Now, moving the focus from the infrastructure to what we call the human architecture, is that these operations, they depend on large, flexible, and increasing global dispersed like workforce. And crucially, the workforce does not fall into neat categories, also what we have already been discussing today. So we see a diversity in age, gender, and nationality. While men often are tasked to carry out the actual scam, women very often, they are used to build the trust with the victims, and in some cases also are subjected to sexual exploitation. Age is another blind spot. So although these workers are often assumed to be young and tech-savvy, profiles are becoming increasingly also mixed, and sometimes also underdocumented, like minors being involved. When looking at the spectrum of exploitation, which is basically the heart of the challenge we're discussing today, is that a recurring question in policy and enforcement discussions is whether people involved in scams are criminals or victims of trafficking. But what we want to say is, and what our research shows, that this is the wrong question. What we want to say is that there is a spectrum of exploitation. And that doesn't neatly fall on one side. It's either the victim or the offender. So on one end, of course, we have the individuals that are clearly trafficked and forced into criminal activity, so working extremely long hours, under threat, subject to violence, punishment. And on the other side of the spectrum, you see individuals who enter knowingly and understand they are engaging in fraud. But very important is that in between, there is a large gray zone. So people who enter voluntarily but cannot leave, people who are initially trafficked but later become successful, air quoting this, people who are rescued, returned home, and then re-recruited. So this complexity disrupts the idea of the perfect victim, what we have also heard already today. So, but still, this does not remove the reality of coercion. So recognizing that we're talking here about a spectrum is essential, because these responses responses that we know so far, they build on a binary category. And this is almost then inevitably a result in the misidentification, criminalization, and re-victimization. When looking at global trends, I'm now for 2 slides, I'm stepping out of the cyber scams compound. We are also seeing that there is a convergence with other forms of crime. And so we're talking about drugs, environmental crime, extractive sector like mining and fishing and logging. And what you can see here is also we have done the research on how criminal activity, for instance, is being done in the extractive sector. So there is de facto happening a criminal activity. De facto, there are laws being broken, but at the same time, we're talking about individuals, victims of labor trafficking, victims of sexual exploitation, and law enforcement members sometimes are not able to identify them as a victim, for instance, of labor trafficking. They just see an illegal minor in front of them. At the same time, we have also looked into, for instance, the issue of the extractive sector, where, for instance, in Mexico, cartels are managing the illegal logging, drugging the workforce. At the end, law enforcement comes and sees illegal loggers that are breaking the environmental crime dynamics. So what is important here to say is that we see how the convergence is part of human trafficking be going into other forms of crime. And this is the ecosystem that we have to look at. What is important, not only in this one particular case, but also in general, when we're talking about human trafficking and other forms of crime, is that we're having the so-called complicity shield. So the findings across our research have seen that, for instance, we're talking about scam operations, again, is they cannot exist without the protection. But again, this is applicable to all the different ecosystems. So through the corruption, selective enforcement, or political interference. And it doesn't mean that there is a direct involvement, but at least it's turning a blind eye, warning operators, and focusing enforcement on low-level actors. So when the pressure increases in one place, we see the displacement, but not the dismantling. So operations move geographically, structurally, organizationally, often to the context with lower awareness, weaker safeguards, or easier access to protection. So this is why arrests alone are not the solution. And if enforcement focuses on the workers rather than on the protection of the structures around these criminal networks, the business model will survive and adapt. Just very briefly on emerging drivers, I think we know this, but what I think here is important to underestimate, to highlight is, or what is often underestimated, is that the re-victimization. So when people are treated as offenders rather than victims, they're pushed back into that. And then also the enforcement priorities. So success is measured by arrests rather than disruptions. And this is also where trafficking for forced criminality becomes not only a human rights issue, but a strategic blind spot for security institutions. So what I want to conclude that forced criminality is not a marginal issue, but it's a core feature of how modern organized crime functions. And if we fail to recognize the victims who are coerced into that crime, we will misidentify the perpetrators, miss the prevention opportunities, and weaken collective security. So a victim-centered, security-informed approach is not a trade-off. It's basically the only way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Livia, and thank you for highlighting again that this isn't a marginal issue. I feel like that's really important, and for touching again on corruption, as Siobhan did in her speech. And again, this idea, holding on to the idea of the spectrum and the grey zone. Thank you. We're going to move, last but not least, onto our final panelist. Sitting at the end, we have Marta Johansson. Marta, I'd love to ask you, what patterns or systemic failures does your research reveal in how states respond to trafficking for forced criminality? And perhaps you can also talk to, are there other forms of trafficking that should be raised in this context? And finally, where are the most critical gaps in legislation and protection?
So thank you so much to be on this panel. So thank you very much. I would like to point to two forms. I'd like to start with that. Recruiting children into serious and violent crimes, and then I'd also like to raise the issue of exploiting persons in schemes of benefit and economic fraud. So recruiting children for serious violent crimes. We've seen in the last year in Sweden, more than 50 children under 15 have been involved in murders or attempted murders for criminal networks. In many cases, they have known the recruiter from the network, but in many other cases, the recruitment has been completely online in what we call crime as a service. And this raises a number of issues. One is included in forced criminality. Is it just for human trafficking? Is it just low-level non-violent crime, such as pickpocketing, that type of crime? Are violent crimes also included? Could that be a form of human trafficking? And also one-off crimes? The EU directive from 2011 says that what should be encompassed within human trafficking is exploitation of criminal activities. It doesn't require any element of force in the trafficking itself. Another issue that is raised has to do with recruitment itself and how we understand recruitment. In cases that have been prosecuted in Sweden, the courts have looked at recruitment as though you are recruited as a member to a criminal network. They haven't viewed that it is recruitment when you are recruited to a specific crime. So those prosecutions have not been successful. Instead, in Sweden, it's being prosecuted under another crime, which is called involvement of a child in criminality. And we have hundreds of those cases with successful prosecutions. That crime is not, the child is not a victim of that crime. It is only a witness of that crime. So this raises several issues, partly of prosecuting for less serious crimes instead of prosecuting for human trafficking in these situations. And it also raises the wider principle of non-punishment, because non-punishment will be triggered when it is a case of human trafficking, not other crimes. So those are some challenges related to children being recruited into more violent crime. But the second issue I'd like to raise is something that you might, I don't know if you've seen cases of this in your states already or not. It's related to a report that the Council of Baltic Sea States published last year together with the Swedish Institute on human trafficking for benefit fraud and related financial fraud. And I'd like to say a few things on that. It seems that when criminal networks expand and diversify, they're often going to use companies as a front for their activities, especially limited liability companies. And this helps them with more large-scale money laundering, and it also allows them to defraud the state and other commercial actors such as banks in larger scale fraud. They'll often be mixing legal and illegal activities. And I'll give you just one example to see how this can work. Just imagine a caregiver company that is providing services for the state. For example, care for the elderly, care for persons with disabilities. So they will bill the state for work provided, and often they will provide some work, but they will bill the state for much more work than is actually provided. On their employment list, they will have persons who are working legally, who are legally in the state, but the ones who are actually performing the work are often dependent workers. They might have a dependent status, that their migration is linked, or it might be that they are working in the state unlawfully. They will often be paid, if they are paid, they will often be paid in cash or into a foreign account, which allows for money laundering in the activities of this company. On the company payroll, the so-called legitimate worker, but the one who's actually not doing the work, is often an associate criminal, which means that they look like they're receiving a legitimate salary, which is another form of money laundering, and this will often also count towards social and pension benefits. So they will be getting benefits from the state, even though they are not providing any legitimate work. And when the company is liquidated, and these companies are often liquidated regularly within a few years, that company will not have paid the wages. And so the state steps in then and pays them for unpaid wages for work they never did. Now, on the company board, they are going to need people who don't have criminal records. And these are your straw men, and there is a possibility to exploit them in multiple ways. Straw men who are then placed on the boards of companies, so they are exploited, and the dependent workers are exploited in these schemes, and the state is exploited. So the straw men will have no criminal record, and electronic IDs will usually be acquired in their names because they are the representative on the board, but you can simultaneously then claim welfare benefits in their names. You can take loans in their names. You can make purchases in their names. You can use their bank accounts for money laundering, and they will become criminally responsible for tax fraud that the company has done, and they will also often be financially responsible for company debts at the company's liquidation when the company goes into bankruptcy. So these are many ways of exploiting these straw men who are vulnerable workers. Let me give you one case. This is from Denmark, and this is one of the early cases, 2015, 2016. A whole network was convicted for human trafficking for criminal acts. What they had done was recruit about 250 to 300 Romanian vulnerable citizens with job offers in Denmark. They had taken their real identity papers and falsified job contracts for Denmark so they could receive their civil registration numbers and electronic IDs for them. So after the initial visit to the bank, the traffickers after that had control over their electronic IDs, which means they could contact banks, money lenders, and government authorities. And then the ball started rolling. They used these identities then for loans in these persons' names, made purchases, named them directors of companies, used them in tax and VAT fraud for these companies. They got parental social security payments, unemployment insurance for them. They housed these persons in very, very poor conditions until they transported them back to Romania, gave them a small payment for their participation. In Denmark, it was possible to convict the traffickers for human trafficking for criminal acts, not forced criminality. So a few challenges then is for states to have exploitation purposes that will also encompass abusing identities, not simply forced criminality or forced labor. That is going to be often more limited. And something I'd like to raise as a last note is that even if you are successful in getting a human trafficking conviction, the economic debt will remain for the victim. And this is not covered by the non-punishment provision because that focuses on the criminal liability. And these debts make the life of these survivors very, very difficult afterwards. And this is a challenge that is also important for states to take on and move forward in allowing the victims to be able to rebuild their lives afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta. Again, incredible insights into, I mean, I hadn't heard of half of that, the straw men, the laundering, but also I love that you flag at the end the remaining economic debt and the fact that there is an aftermath and there are consequences that currently aren't being dealt with and are often ignored. A huge thank you to our amazing panel. You have shared so much today. You've talked about the scale, the awful conditions, the evolving nature of forced criminality, and the aftermath, even when victims, survivors get out the other end, what support is given to them, what support is offered. I think can we do a round of applause for our panel? So with that, we are going to hand the floor over to our distinguished delegates now. We're going to be taking comments and we're going to have to be very strict with timing. So each delegate will have 2 minutes. And if you see me raise my hand in the air, if you could find a way of rounding up your comments. First on my list is the distinguished representative of Ukraine. And following that, we will have the representative of the Netherlands. But first, the Ukraine. Many thanks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Phoebe. Dear colleagues, I'm Lyudmila Shemelinets, First Deputy Minister of Social Policy, Family and Unity of Ukraine, CTHB National Coordinator. Today, I want to start with a very uncomfortable truth. In many of our systems, victims of trafficking are still being punished instead of protected. And this is exactly what makes forced criminality such a dangerous blind spot. This issue is not an abstract threat in Ukraine. On the contrary, it is directly linked to the consequences of Russia's armed aggression. The war has dramatically increased vulnerability. Millions of people have been displaced. Families have been separated. People have been deported. And in these conditions, the risk of exploitation grows rapidly. Children are at the center of this risk. They are deported under the pretext of evacuation or rehabilitation, and they're isolated from their families. They are also recruited through messaging apps into criminal activities, including arson and sabotage. This is coercion, this is exploitation, and this is a prompt security threat. Across the OSCE region, we see similar patterns. People in situation of extreme vulnerability, children, displaced persons, migrants, are forced into illegal activities. Not by choice, but by coercion, by control, by danger to survival. And yet, too often, they are treated as offenders. This breaks the core principle we all claim to support, a victim-centered approach. When victims are punished, criminal networks remain invisible and protected. If identification of criminals fails, protection fails. If protection fails, justice fails. That is why for us, three things are critical. First, early identification. Second, non-punishment principle priority. Third, strong coordination. This is not only about human rights. This is about security. As long as victims are treated as criminals, organized crime continues to operate safely. Ukraine is dealing with this reality every day. Therefore, we must shift focuses from criminalization to protection, from reaction to prevention, from fragmentation to coordination. The full statement will be distributed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing your statement. I'm going to pass the floor directly now to our distinguished representative of the Netherlands. Thank you.
Distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, thank you to the OSCE for highlighting this important topic, and this worrying trend is also noticeable in the Netherlands. Let me allow me to highlight three programs we implemented to try to combat forced criminality in the Netherlands. First of all is the Prevention with Authority program. It's a program that's financed by the Ministry of Justice and Security, which gives 47 municipalities funding to combat youth crime and prevention, and gives also attention to forced criminality at a local level. One of the programs that has been funded by it is the online portal Turning Point, which is operated by the Center of Child and Human Trafficking in the Netherlands. And the colleagues of the Child and Human Trafficking are also here present. They will participate in the panel of tomorrow, the third one. So if you have any questions about the portal, please feel free. I think they will be happy to answer any questions. To give a short overview about it, it's an anonymous portal where potential victims can chat and explain their situation to somebody who has been trained, so that they can maybe refer to police or other institutions according to their situation. They try to do through online outreach to reach potential victims who will mostly not see themselves as victims, but probably are. So here you have an important combination of the online and the criminal exploitation, which has been mentioned already a few times. The third one is the Port Alliance program by the Harbor of Rotterdam. We see a worrying trend that minors are being recruited to take out drugs from the Harbor of Rotterdam. One of the important pillars of this program is to create awareness among the youth and to make them aware about the dangers of getting involved in criminality and in forced criminality. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.
Thank you so much. We'd like to hand the floor now to the representative of France, and following on from that, the representative of the United States. But first, we welcome to the floor the representative of France. Thank you so much.
Et je remercie également l'ensemble des intervenants pour ces échanges tout à fait passionnants. La prévention et la lutte contre toutes les finalités de la traite des êtres humains, et en particulier la criminalité forcée, constituent l'une de nos priorités en matière de protection et de promotion des droits humains. Et en effet, l'exploitation d'activités criminelles ou délictuelles demeure aujourd'hui largement invisible. En France, les données disponibles démontrent que cette exploitation est loin d'être marginale. En 2024, 10% des victimes identifiées en faisaient l'objet, et de manière significative, plus de la moitié d'entre elles étaient mineures. Il y avait également de nombreux mineurs non accompagnés. Pourtant, selon les associations qui ont accompagné ces victimes, 94% d'entre elles ont été mises en cause pour des faits commis dans le cadre de leur exploitation, et une grande majorité d'entre elles a été condamnée. Cette réalité nous oblige et impose de rappeler l'importance du principe de non-sanction des victimes, en cohérence avec les spécificités de notre droit, et notamment le principe d'opportunité des poursuites. Cela implique que les systèmes judiciaires, policiers et sociaux soient en mesure d'identifier les situations d'exploitation derrière les actes délictueux. Et pour ce faire, nous valorisons la mise en œuvre de formations adaptées, le développement d'outils de repérage et une coopération étroite entre les acteurs concernés. Par ailleurs, l'analyse des situations démontre que les victimes d'exploitation en France sont souvent sous emprise dite chimique, souffrent de polyaddictions médicamenteuses et ou aux drogues qui sont fournies par l'exploitant afin de les rendre dépendantes et de les désinhiber en vue de commettre des infractions. Face à ce constat, la France rappelle la nécessité d'une prise en charge holistique et d'une orientation de ces victimes vers des dispositifs spécialisés dans la prise en charge des addictions. Au-delà des réponses nationales, cette problématique criminelle appelle à une mobilisation internationale renforcée autour de plusieurs axes, à savoir l'harmonisation des cadres juridiques, le partage d'informations et de bonnes pratiques entre les États, notamment pour l'identification des victimes. Cela suppose des mécanismes de coopération opérationnelle entre les services répressifs, les autorités judiciaires et les acteurs de la protection. Enfin, il est essentiel de développer des dispositifs de protection transnationaux, indépendamment du statut administratif des victimes. Pour finir, je souhaite souligner que la France renforce des actions de sensibilisation et de formation sur la traite des êtres humains pour les professionnels à la fois de l'éducation, de la protection de l'enfance, de la protection judiciaire de la jeunesse, du secteur de l'asile et des migrations, des inspecteurs du travail, mais aussi des enquêteurs et des magistrats. Il s'agit d'intensifier le repérage précoce et l'identification des victimes en amont de la coopération judiciaire et d'améliorer l'accompagnement de celles-ci tout au long de leur parcours. À ce titre, nous œuvrons à la mise en œuvre d'un mécanisme national d'identification précoce, d'orientation et de protection des victimes. Madame la représentante spéciale, la France soutient l'action de l'OSCE dans la lutte contre la traite des êtres humains sous toutes ses formes et maintiendra son soutien pour prévenir et lutter contre celle-ci, en particulier face aux défis modernes qui amplifient les vulnérabilités et accroissent les risques d'exploitation. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much for your statement. We'll be passing the floor now to the representative of the United States and thereafter to the representative of the Russian Federation. But first to the United States. Many thanks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the panelists for your insights this afternoon. As highlighted in the OSCE 2026 survey report, and as we've been discussing today, forced criminality is among the fastest growing and most profitable forms of human trafficking. Online scam operations, as we've heard this afternoon, illustrate the severity of this threat. President Trump set forth robust actions in his March 6 executive order on cybercrime, fraud, and predatory schemes against American citizens, and underscored that these schemes are fueled by human trafficking. As a low-end estimate, in 2024 alone, at least $10 billion were stolen from U.S. citizens through cyber scams emanating from Southeast Asia. Behind many of these fraudulent transactions are trafficking victims exploited into perpetrating online fraud, as we've heard today. These operations enrich transnational criminal organizations while harming victims on both sides of the screen. Unfortunately, human trafficking victims are often arrested and risk prosecution for acts they were forced to commit. Some countries highlight these arrests as measures of progress, which is concerning, since the measure of progress should be prosecuting the criminal networks that exploit people, corrupt governments, and destroy livelihoods. The United States is leading the charge on holding the criminal networks running these operations to account by means of sanctions and other tools. In January, President Trump also signed the Trafficking Survivors Relief Act, creating the first federal pathway for survivors in the United States to vacate convictions and expunge their arrest records for certain offenses directly resulting from their trafficking. We look forward to the discussions ahead and will take note of other countries' actions. Words and promises are not enough, and we will continue to use tools available to protect trafficked victims, dismantle online scam operations, and protect U.S. citizens. We urge other countries to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. We're going to be moving next to the representatives of the Russian Federation and after the representatives of Liechtenstein. First to the Russian Federation, you have the floor. Many thanks.
Хочу выразить благодарность за приглашение к обсуждению проблемы, требующей совместного решения на международном уровне. Сегодня принудительный труд жертв торговли людьми используется не только на тяжелых физических работах. Получило распространение, например, их привлечение к телефонному и кибермошенничеству. В целом по стране в 2025 году расследовано 39 преступлений по статье торговли людьми, совершенных 48 лицами. Из них в суды направлено 15 уголовных дел в отношении 33 лиц. Необходимо отметить и такую современную форму эксплуатации, как совершение преступлений под воздействием угроз или иного внушения со стороны третьих лиц, использующих методы социальной инженерии. Безусловно, к жертве торговли людьми, принужденной к совершению преступления, требуется особый подход со стороны государства при определении ее процессуального статуса в уголовном судопроизводстве и квалификации действий. Тезис о необходимости освобождения от ответственности за совершение общественно опасных деяний, обусловленных пребыванием в качестве жертвы торговли людьми, находит отражение в национальной правоприменительной практике. Так, в суд направлено уголовное дело в отношении членов преступной группы, организовавших содержание притонов и занятие проституцией женщинами, в том числе подростками, а также торговавших ими и принуждавших жертв к продолжению занятием проституцией под их контролем. В данном случае жертвы торговли людьми признаны потерпевшими и не привлекались к юридической ответственности за проституцию. В российском уголовном законодательстве также содержатся нормы, исключающие уголовную ответственность лица за совершение преступления в условиях крайней необходимости, физического или психического принуждения. Вместе с тем, в каждом конкретном случае следует тщательно проверять наличие таких условий, повлиявших на совершение преступления жертвы торговли людьми. Завершая свое выступление, в очередной раз хочу подчеркнуть, что важную роль в борьбе с торговлей людьми и защите ее жертв играет международное сотрудничество, обмен накопленным опытом и оперативной информацией, оказание правовой помощи по уголовным делам. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you so much. And before handing over to the representative of Liechtenstein, I want to announce that thereafter we will have the representative of Serbia. To the representative of Liechtenstein, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, dear colleagues. Liechtenstein would like to thank the OSCE for organizing this important conference and this compelling discussion today. We are grateful to all panelists for their valuable insights. The discussion has highlighted how people subjected to trafficking and exploitation are often forced into unlawful acts as part of their abuse, only to be confronted by criminal justice systems that fail to recognize their victimization. Responding to exploitation solely through punishment rather than protection not only causes further harm to those affected, it also undermines efforts to dismantle criminal networks that profit from these practices. Liechtenstein therefore believes that responses to trafficking must be holistic and place the individual at the center, while at the same time strengthening prevention and security outcomes. In this context, the financial sector has a crucial role to play. This is reflected in the OSCE publication following the Money 2.0 and in the work of the Liechtenstein Initiative on Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking, FAST. Through FAST, which is hosted by UNDP, we engage banks, investors, and other financial actors in identifying and addressing trafficking risks and impacts. FAST survivor inclusion approach is particularly relevant. Since its inception, FAST has promoted the meaningful engagement of people with lived experience in shaping financial policies, products, and programs. It has also supported efforts on financial access and recovery, an essential aspect given the significant barriers survivors continue to face, including stigma and exclusion from formal systems. Madam Moderator, as forced criminality is currently the fastest growing form of trafficking, we welcome the timely focus of this conference, which will continue to global efforts to eradicate these inhumane crimes. Liechtenstein remains fully committed to this work and to advancing more effective and humane responses to trafficking in all its forms. To sum up my remarks, I would have a question to the panel. Where do you see currently the biggest challenges in the implementation of the non-punishment principle? I thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your question as well. Next, we'll be passing the floor to the representative of Serbia, followed by the representative of Cyprus on behalf of the European Union. But first, to the representative of Serbia. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, allow me in my capacity as the National Rapporteur of the Republic of Serbia to inform you that the Republic of Serbia has today adopted a systemic law on the suppression of trafficking in human beings and the protection of victims of trafficking in human beings. Bearing in mind that the adoption of such a systemic law was one of the first recommendations of the National Rapporteur of the Republic of Serbia, I would like to take this opportunity to emphasize that the anti-trafficking system in Serbia has moved beyond the so-called gray zone of project-based activities and has evolved into a systemic response with clearly defined mechanism in line with social path principles and all relevant international standards. I would also like to highlight that on 30 July 2025, we published the second report of the National Rapporteur, which contains 13 new recommendations, and that we are currently in the process of monitoring that implementation. One of the key challenges we have identified is the need to clearly distinguish between the criminal offenses of trafficking in human beings and violations of labor rights. We are fully committed to this process and expect intensive multi-sectoral efforts by the end of 2026 in order to establish consistent and effective practice. In addition to the further strengthening of the anti-trafficking system through the adoption of a new legislative framework, it is important to underline that the protector of citizens of the Republic of Serbia clearly recognize the new migration reality. Today, alongside migrants in mixed migrants flows and persons seeking asylum, this reality increasingly includes the presence of foreign workers, which further increases the need for an effective and timely institutional response. What is common to all these categories is need for a system of early risk identification and an approach that ensure monitoring and protection of rights throughout the entire migration cycle, from the first contact with institutions, during stay, and any possible change of status to return and readmission procedures. It is particularly important to identify risk in a timely manner, especially the risk of trafficking in human beings, labor exploitation, and other forms of abuse or violations of human rights. In this context, the protector of citizens of the Republic of Serbia, through its work, recognized the importance of establishing an independent border monitoring mechanism with the institution with the aim of overseeing procedures from the very first point of contact, strengthening standards and prevention possible violations of rights. Such a mechanism is also of particular importance in return and readmission procedures, where full respect for the rights and dignity of every individual must be ensured. At the same time, what practice increasingly demonstrates and the protector of citizens of the Republic of Serbia seeks to initiative through in dual role. As the independent human rights institution and as the national rapporteur of trafficking in human beings, it's the need for further capacity building of competent actors and the establishment of clearly operation guidance. This particular concern the ability of the system to distinguish in a timely manner violations of labor rights from more serious forms of abuse, as well to identify case of labor exploitation for the purpose of trafficking in human beings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your statement. Handing the floor now to the representative of Cyprus on behalf of the EU, followed by the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I will take the floor on behalf of the European Union as I'm the EU anti-trafficking coordinator dealing specifically with trafficking in human beings. I would like to thank the Special Representative and Coordinator, Kerry, for having put this on the agenda. It's an increasing form of trafficking worldwide, including in the European Union, where it is representing 2%, 178 victims who have been formally identified in the context of forced criminality. Compared, however, to UNODC and OSCE figures, it could mean that many victims of forced criminality are not detected in the European Union or are registered as victims of sexual or labor exploitation or other forms of exploitation, or simply are not recognized, as I said. There are clear gaps in identification of victims, in protection, and in access to justice. Too often, the principle of non-punishment is not fully applied in practice. And I would like to underline that the European Union legislation, which has to be transposed in all the member states, the EU Anti-Trafficking Directive includes exploitation of criminal activities and foresees the non-prosecution of victims who are involved in crimes and unlawful activities, which was introduced recently in the modified directive. However, obviously, legislation is not enough. We need targeted awareness-raising campaigns, and here press can also play a very important role. We need outreach to groups at risk, and it's very difficult because there's not a specific profile of these groups or victims. We need information about recruitment practices and indicators to identify cases. Frontline actors, including law enforcement and judicial authorities, must have the tools, the training, and the capacity to see and investigate coercion behind the offense. Forced criminality is often linked to polycriminality and involves organized criminal groups, so investigation must cover the whole chain to ensure conviction and deterrent sanctions for all the crimes committed, and this at the highest level of the criminal network. This implies also parallel financial investigations. Operational cooperation takes place in the EU with partner countries with the support of union agencies like Europol and Eurojust, and in the context of operations, impact operations. The industrialized scam centers bring a new dimension to trafficking in general, not only global outreach due to the digital dimension, but also artificial intelligence and many victims, those forced to commit digital fraud and the victims of the scams as such. This is one example which shows that we need a comprehensive approach, not seeing human trafficking, including forced criminality, in isolation. And this is also the approach of the European Union in the context of the strategy on internal security. And this is the approach which will be further reinforced through a new strategy dedicated to trafficking human beings, which will be released towards the end of the year, probably in October. And we need also a global and well-coordinated approach involving international cooperation, including with the support of other organizations like OSCE, but also directly with partners outside Europe. And at the same time, and we heard this also, we need a victim-centered approach, which has to be at the heart of everything. So to conclude, forced criminality is not only a human trafficking issue, it is a threat to security. It is a threat to the rule of law and the safety of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your statements. We are going to be moving on to representatives of the UK, followed by Canada. And just another quick reminder to try and keep your responses to 2 minutes where possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the panelists for such insightful presentations. The United Kingdom is firmly committed to tackling modern slavery and human trafficking in all its forms. Human trafficking for forced criminality, particularly within cyber scam operations, is one of the fastest evolving forms of exploitation globally. Cyber scam centers pose major security and human rights risks worldwide, impacting thousands, including those in the UK. We are working with partners to fight human trafficking and forced labor tied to these scams, to protect victims and hold offenders accountable. This includes imposing sanctions on individuals and entities involved in these activities. Effective cross-border law enforcement cooperation, including in the digital sphere, is essential. Alongside this, strong victim identification and support systems, preventative measures, and meaningful partnerships with civil society are critical. This is why the UK is supporting targeted projects in Southeast Asia to raise awareness of scam center trafficking risks, strengthen victim support, reintegration pathways, and build law enforcement capacity to respond. This year, we've also been pleased to support the OSCE to develop a study on trafficking for forced criminality and cyber scam center operations in the OSCE region, which will be launched later today. The UK continues to support the work of multilateral partners, including the OSCE, the UN, the Alliance 8.7 Global Partnership, and the Global Commission on Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking to help achieve our collective aims. This is very much a global challenge. As OSCE participating states, working together and building shared understanding is critical to tackling this issue. We would like to thank the Special Representative for your international leadership and the pivotal role your office plays in coordinating efforts to address this crime and shining a light on emerging and overlooked forms of trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcoming the representative of Canada, followed by the representative of Uzbekistan. Thank you.
Ms. Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let me begin by thanking the OSCE for organizing this very useful event. In Canada, strengthening our understanding and response to forced criminality is part of a broader effort to ensure our approach to combating human trafficking remains modern, adaptable, and responsive to evolving realities. As part of the renewal process of Canada's national strategy to combat human trafficking, our Ministry of Public Safety led the federal government's engagement with a wide range of stakeholders, including survivors, as well as non-governmental and intergovernmental organizations. We learned from these consultations that while trafficking for sexual exploitation and forced labor remain the most prevalent forms in Canada, forced criminality is also a reality, although it is often difficult to obtain quality data on its prevalence. We also heard that forced criminality is frequently intertwined with sexual exploitation, and that survivors are often more likely to accept criminal charges for acts they were compelled to commit than to report their traffickers. As a result, victims of forced criminality are too often criminalized rather than protected. Je vais maintenant parler en français. Le Canada est vivement préoccupé par la traite des personnes à des fins de criminalité forcée liées aux opérations de fraude de masse et aux complexes d'arnaque, un phénomène en forte croissance, notamment en Asie du Sud-Est. Les victimes y sont contraintes de commettre des actes de fraude et de blanchiment d'argent, causant à son tour une victimisation à l'échelle mondiale, y compris au Canada, où les pertes ont dépassé 700 millions de dollars en 2025. Des rapports récents des Nations unies font état de graves violations des droits de la personne subies par les victimes de criminalité forcée dans ces centres d'arnaque. Par l'intermédiaire du programme d'aide au renforcement des capacités de lutte contre la criminalité, le Canada soutient des initiatives régionales de prévention et de protection, notamment par la formation des agents frontaliers pour mieux détecter la traite des personnes à des fins de criminalité forcée. Compte tenu de la nature transnationale de ces crimes, la coopération internationale et l'échange d'informations sont essentiels afin de protéger les victimes et les personnes survivantes. Le Canada valorise le partage de pratiques exemplaires et appuie le travail de la représentante spéciale de l'OSCE et de son équipe, tout en soulignant l'importance d'une coordination régionale continue pour relever ce défi en constante évolution. Merci.
Thank you very much for your statements. We have two remaining delegates. So last but not least, the final two, I'll be handing the floor to the representative of Uzbekistan and then finally to the representative of Kyrgyzstan. Thank you.
Уважаемый спецпредставитель ОБСЕ по борьбе с торговлей людьми госпожа Кэрри Джонстон, дамы и господа, благодарю за предоставленное слово. Я являюсь детским омбудсменом парламента Узбекистана. Выражая свою твердую приверженность в борьбе с торговлей людьми, а также вовлечением несовершеннолетних в преступную деятельность, Узбекистан уделяет системное внимание совершенствованию национального законодательства и практики на основе международных документов. В частности, в законе о противодействии торговле людьми предусмотрена дефиниция торговли несовершеннолетними. Уголовное наказание в виде лишения свободы за торговлю людьми ужесточено до 15 лет. В Уголовном кодексе Узбекистана торговля людьми в отношении ребенка установлена как особо тяжкое преступление. Криминализировано привлечение несовершеннолетнего к попрошайничеству. Важно отметить, что в Узбекистане под руководством президента в сфере защиты прав детей осуществляются последовательные реформы. В системе социальной защиты проведена деинституционализация всех форм ухода за детьми, лишенными родительской опеки. Так были закрыты более 30 институциональных учреждений и внедрена эффективная система альтернативного устройства этих детей в формате семейного окружения с учетом их наилучших интересов. Вступил в силу закон о защите детей от всех форм насилия, который четко определил формы насилия, адресные меры по защите, а также механизм межведомственной работы в данном направлении. Государством принята стратегия действий на 2026-2030 годы, направленная на оказание комплексной помощи детям, жертвам насилия и эксплуатации, путем внедрения в том числе Института Барнахус. С учетом глобальной повестки, сегодня в Узбекистане принимаются решительные меры по предотвращению использования уязвимого положения детей и вовлечения их в преступность. В частности, принята национальная стратегия по борьбе с наркоманией и наркопреступлениями, в рамках которой внедряется криминализация вовлечения несовершеннолетнего в употребление сильно действующих веществ. Также признается особо тяжким преступлением любое наркопреступление в отношении детей или с их вовлечением. Совсем недавно принят указ президента, на основе которого внедряется наказание в виде пожизненного лишения свободы за преступление против половой неприкосновенности детей. И буквально на днях, 17 апреля, вступил в силу закон о криминализации хранения и распространения детской порнографии. Пользуясь возможностью, хотелось бы поблагодарить ОБСЕ за конструктивное партнерство в вопросах противодействия насилию в отношении детей в цифровой среде, включая наращивание потенциала следственных органов и изучение передовых практик по внедрению стандартных операционных процедур. В заключение отмечу, все эти кардинальные усилия свидетельствуют о последовательном и устойчивом курсе правовых и институциональных реформ в Узбекистане по защите детей от насилия, эксплуатации и их вовлечения в преступность. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, the representative of Kyrgyzstan, you have the floor.
Madam Chairperson, good afternoon, Excellence, ladies and gentlemen. Dear colleagues, the Kyrgyz Republic attaches high priority to a systematic and comprehensive response to trafficking in persons and modern forms of forced criminality and continues to strengthen its national response architecture. In the context, I would like to highlight an important institutional development. At the beginning of 2026, the status of the National Reporter on Trafficking in Persons was elevated to the level of the first Vice Speaker of the Parliament of Kyrgyz Republic. This decision significantly strengthens the political weight of the mandate, expands opportunities for parliamentary oversight and coordination, and adds new momentum to the entire national anti-trafficking system for legislation to law enforcement. In response to growing challenges related to forced criminality and exploitation, the Kyrgyz Republic is implementing consistent and systemic measures, including strengthening interagency, coordination between law enforcement, social and migration authorities to enable earlier identification of exploitation cases, developing specialized units and enhancing the capacity of personnel working on trafficking in persons and forced labor cases, expanding preventive measures, including nationwide awareness campaigns to reduce vulnerability among the population. And I want to say that the Kyrgyz Republic remains a reliable and active partner of the OSCE. I wish you all great success and productive discussions. Thank you for your attention.
A huge thank you to everyone for your statements. How to summarize everything that we've discussed on this panel. I think it's impossible, but what I will ask is for our panelists to each leave us with a final closing thought, perhaps touching on our question from Serbia about the challenges of non-punishment. Oh, from France, was it? Apologies.
Sorry, no, it was Liechtenstein. Really sorry. It was that end of the room.
Apologies. Did I get your question right? Yes. Marta, perhaps we might begin with you.
Right. To punishment, there are many things. I guess one of the challenges is what kind of crimes are covered by non-punishment. That's one of the issues. Another one would involve what kind of coercion is required for this. Does it encompass, for example, abuse of a position of vulnerability? Is that enough? Or does it require more for the principle to be triggered? And then I would kind of reiterate my final comments on the civil law consequences, that we have that whole economic aftermath, which is not covered today. So those are the points, and there many more could be raised, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, and sorry for the time constraints. Siobhan, perhaps you'd like to leave us with a closing thought from today.
Thank you. I think the challenges of implementation of the non-punishment principle are many, but first and foremost, it's in terms of recognition of forced criminality as a form of trafficking and ineffective recognition of the human rights of victims, and recognizing that human rights law response is not in tension with a security response or a criminal justice focus. A key challenge I think that we have and that we must recognize is that international law and domestic law on human trafficking is implemented often in a manner that is deeply racialized and deeply gendered. And so those who are victims are often not recognized as such, but are instead prosecuted or punished in other ways, including being subject to administrative sanctions, forced removals and deportations, arbitrary arrests and detentions. So we need to recognize and acknowledge that. We also need to recognize that implementation of the non-punishment principle requires ensuring effective access to justice to victims and survivors with disabilities, and recognizing also the challenges of applying a human rights-based response where there may be significant pressures in relation to national security or public policy interests in accelerating prosecutions and securing convictions, which may end up prosecuting or punishing the wrong person and leaving victims or survivors without effective remedies and without respect for their rights as victims. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Keeping it in the legal sphere, I might pass to you, Gail, now for closing comments.
Oui, merci. Alors, dans le droit positif français, il est tout à fait envisagé ce que vous appelez le principe de non-sanction. Pour nous, il s'agit de faits justificatifs et en l'occurrence, ce serait la contrainte. Nous avons 4 faits justificatifs, dont la contrainte physique, contrainte morale, qui permet, si l'élément est caractérisé, de ne pas poursuivre l'infraction puisque l'élément intentionnel, lui, n'est pas caractérisé puisque la personne n'était pas consentante pour commettre ces infractions. Il n'y avait pas un élément intentionnel. Et donc, on peut tout à fait écarter la poursuite des infractions qui pourraient lui être opposées par ce biais-là. Mais je reviens à ce que j'ai dit tout à l'heure. La principale difficulté, c'est que les victimes ne décrivent pas les mesures de contrainte qu'elles ont subies. Elles vont, pour certaines, jusqu'à revendiquer d'avoir agi en toute conscience et librement pour ne surtout pas avoir à désigner des auteurs. Et donc, peur de représailles, vous avez parlé, Phoebe, tout à l'heure de la famille. Nous avons qui est menacée. Nous avons très souvent des portes d'appartements incendiées, des petits frères, des petites sœurs qui sont menacés, frappés, des parents évidemment aussi. Donc, juridiquement, nous avons dans notre droit positif, quelles que soient d'éventuelles réformes législatives, ça n'est pas de mon ressort, mais nous avons dans le droit positif les moyens de ne pas sanctionner la victime, mais encore faut-il qu'elle dénonce les faits qu'elle a subis. C'est toute notre difficulté. Et je vous le disais, je suis intimement convaincue que si le maillage associatif et en tout cas ce qu'on pourrait proposer en termes de protection, d'éloignement et de protection de la victime et de sa famille était plus élaboré, les langues se déliraient.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for raising this idea of fear of reprisals and the problem of identification. And on that note, I think I'd like to pass to you, Sakan, if that's possible. Perhaps you have some final thoughts or a closing statement.
Касательно принципа ненаказания, я солидарен, да, нужно доказать. Но найти доказательства... Да. Касательно принципа, касательно вот ненаказания, я солидарен, должны быть доказательства, но это мало осуществимо. Да, они могут предоставить какие-то... Это будут всего лишь слова. Любой человек, который оказался вот в системе ТЛ, может также вернуться, как вот я не буду называть тех людей, которые были со мной, которые решили остаться в преступной группировке по своему желанию. И, насколько я знаю, сейчас данные люди уже вернулись в свои государства и продолжают также безнаказанно дальше жить. Тут исключительно нужны, да, доказательства искать, но могут быть лишь только слова, а они должны быть чем-то подкреплены.
Thank you so much, Sarkan. Thank you for sharing your personal experience with us today. So finally, last but not least, and we will take one final question, I think, at the end that was missed. But Livia, would you like to offer a closing thought?
Yes, thank you very much. There's nothing much more to add. I think what what is absolutely important, and I'm really grateful that the OSCE and other organizations have put this on the table, that human trafficking cannot be just addressed as an isolated form of crime. It is highly interconnected. We're talking about an illicit economy where actors are very much working in an agile system, an ecosystem, and we are just at the moment addressing it in siloed ways. We are talking about like how to break these silos, and we have not managed to do that. And I think it's really the time to start to break these silos. It's important to understand from a research perspective how these actors work, modus operandi, but there also has to be the political will to work across the sectors. So that is, yeah. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to the panelists for all your final closing comments. There was one question that I believed we missed. Do we know where the question was?
Yeah, Kazakhstan. I think
Yes.
the delegation had raised their placard that we didn't see. Sorry, we did not see the raising of the placard.
One more time, I would like to thank moderator for giving me a chance for asking for two remarks. First of all, I would like to ask everyone to applaud for brave heart of Saken, that he now with us, and he share his real life experience, how it was in Myanmar, and now how it's in Kazakhstan, and we are it's as governmental level, as NGO level, as social non-governmental organization, we are all together, shadow to shadow, knows the problems that are in front of us, especially in the case of Saken, and we are trying to solve it. And I would like to echo to Madam Deputy Public Prosecutor of Aix-en-Provence. Could I follow in French? Madame Ortiz, pour nous, c'est très très bien invisible que Aix-en-Provence et Marseille est très très bonne, très très belle région, très très belle ville, et je vous souhaite dans votre travail quotidien bonne chance, bon courage. C'est tout.
Merci.
Oh, wonderful. Well, with that, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all our amazing panelists, to all our distinguished guests in the room. I think a huge round of applause is in order, and then I will hand the floor to Carrie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Phoebe, and all of our fantastic panelists for that first session. Thank you all also for the good questions and contributions to the discussion. As you may have noticed, we're a little bit over past schedule. So the two side events that are happening today will start a little later. We're going to ask if everyone could try to move to those venues fairly quickly. We'll try to start as close after 5 o'clock as possible. So one is in the bibliothèque salle, the other is in room 533. So there will be signs as you leave, but one is to the right, the other is to the left once you get to the coffee area. But thank you all again, and we will see you tomorrow morning. To clarify, the side events will start at 5:05 or 17:05.